Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Friday, and that means it is Friday free for all. It is mailbag time. The first hour of the show today is just going to be me, Vince D'Addario, our football analyst, who is normally here on Friday, is home taking care of his family today. So he is going to be doing producing things today, but he is not going to be on screen today. He will be behind the scenes today doing his producing job. So with that, I want to just kind of talk about just a couple things we've got going on. Obviously, Ryan Roberts will join us for the second half of the show. Next week, Monday, we're going to, over the next 2 weeks, sort of turn into our normal sort of off-season routine, which I'm really excited about. And so we're going to launch over the next 2 weeks. One of those things will be every Monday is going to be a recruiting podcast. It's going to be Ryan Roberts doing the show. He'll do it with me early on. Eventually, it'll transition to him doing interviews and having Sean on, and it'll take a whole lot of different ways. But early on, it'll be with me on the show, and we're just going to talk the latest in Notre Dame recruiting. We're also going to add a weekly, nightly recruiting show, which I'm very excited about, which is going to be a lot of fun, and that is going to be where we talk about, we'll do like film breakdowns. We'll go over big boards. We'll really get into the particulars. If there's Notre Dame gets a, think they're going to get a commitment or they just threw a new offer out or something along those lines, we'll break down that film. So it'll take a little bit of a different look when we do that. It's probably going to be Wednesday night. We haven't locked down for sure what the night is going to be. And then we're going to add some team shows in there. I'm going to probably do a Saturday show, which is going to take on a little bit of a different look. So I'm very excited to kick off our recruiting coverage and our new look, our new format of our podcast. I'm very, very excited about that. So with that being said, it is time to get into the Friday mailbag. We're going to make one little change to the mailbag. So we have been getting a lot of super chats in the mailbag, and we love those, and we greatly appreciate those. Those things help me expand the business. They're part of the reason I can hire Ryan Roberts. They're part of the reason I can hire Sean. They're part of the reason that we can buy new equipment and all those type of things, which we're doing. And I told you all at the beginning, if you support us financially, we will reinvest in the company. However, I feel like the super chats have also taken us a little bit away from what really grew this podcast to begin, which was just answering every question. So we're going to still obviously make sure every super chat is answered, but on these mailbag types, we're going to go back a little bit to where it was, where we're just going to go through all the questions. And that way because I looked at the questions last week, there were so many questions that we just didn't get to. And I don't want us to lose that. So we're gonna mix things up a little bit. We're gonna get back to just sort of the format that we had before, and really make sure that we are making sure that everybody's getting their questions answered, and that we're having some fun doing it too. So that's what we're gonna do. So that's, with that being said, Mr. Producer, let's get this thing rocking and rolling. Corey D says, I don't understand why people think that Tommy Rees is Bill Walsh. Why is Freeman giving Rees so much power? It disturbs me that Rees wants to stay. Rees has Kelly's mentality, and that worries me. Well, a couple things about your comment. Number one is, obviously, he doesn't have that much authority. If he wanted Del Alexander to stay, Del Alexander's not staying. So obviously, he didn't have that much say on it. So, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, also, the thing you have to understand is Marcus Freeman is giving Tommy Rees what Marcus Freeman always wanted as a head coach, and that is, as a coordinator, and that is, look, when you're a coordinator, you want to have the ability to build your staff the way you want it. If I'm going to be successful as a coach, I need to make sure that the staff around me is a staff that I believe in, a staff that I support, a staff that's going to do things the way that I want them, a staff that's going to really understand, okay, this is who I am. This is the way we go about our business. This is just who we are. And so all he's doing is giving Tommy Rees the same ability to have a major say in the staff that he wanted. So I think that's why he's doing that. And to the first part of your question, nobody's saying Tommy Rees is Bill Walsh. That's a incredibly hyperbolic statement that no one's really saying. What we have said is that Tommy Rees is a very smart young coach with a lot of potential, but he's also someone who has a lot to prove. He has a lot to prove as a coordinator. He has a lot to prove as a play caller. He has a lot to prove as a quarterbacks coach, and he especially has a lot to prove as a recruiter of quarterbacks, which I think we could argue has been maybe his biggest issue so far. So nobody is doing that, but if you're going to have a guy on staff as a coordinator, you need to allow him to kind of build the staff the way that he wants it, because I'm a big believer in this, right? Corey, is if you're going to have a coordinator, you need to allow him to run the show to a certain degree, especially when he's on the opposite side of the ball as what your area of expertise is. And that is obviously the case. Brian Kelly did a good job of that in recent years. He let Marcus Freeman and Clark Lee and Mike Elko just kind of run the defense. Well, that's what Marcus Freeman's going to do with the offense. And if you don't think he's good enough to do that, then he shouldn't be on your staff. And so I think that's what he's allowing him to do. And you say that Rees has Kelly's mentality. No, he doesn't. Brian Kelly and Tommy Rees have different mentalities. That doesn't mean that Brian Kelly hasn't had a heavy influence on Tommy Rees. And that to me is a bit concerning, but they have very different mentalities. So, and they're also at very different stages in life. Brian Kelly, when he was 29 years old, was a very competitive, fiery guy that was having a decent amount of success in his career, especially as he kind of got into his 30s. So, I think that sometimes some people may err on the side of, okay, they're giving Tommy Rees too much credit. He hasn't been a great offensive coordinator yet. That is true. And I think sometimes people like you, Corey, sort of, because you don't like Brian Kelly, understandably, and because Tommy Rees played for him and was hired by him, you now lump every negative feeling you have about Brian Kelly onto Tommy Rees, which is, I also think, a little bit unfair. So I think we need to give Tommy Rees a clean slate in regards to his connection to Brian Kelly and evaluate him for the job he has and hasn't done. And you can come to the conclusion that he's not doing a great job. That's very fair. But I don't think doing it in a way that we are talking about him as, Brian Kelly's boy or whatever the case may be, I don't think that's the case. So need to make sure that my producer's paying attention, because I'm wrapping up that first question and getting to my next one. So Demetrius Rex with a super chat. Demetrius says, Brian, you've chalked up a lot of Tyler Buchner's mistakes in the season to him being young, which makes a lot of sense. However, are there any fundamental issues, non-youth or experience related, that worry you about his game? Merci. Demetrius, I think there are some things. I look, you always anticipate a young guy being able to kind of come up and eventually he's going to have to learn better footwork and better overall lower body mechanics and make better reads and, make better decisions with the football. Those are always going to be part of the equation. But I think those things you anticipate improving upon. The one thing that concerns me a little bit about Tyler Buchner that's not necessarily related to that is his deep ball technique. And when he throws the deep ball, he has a little bit of it's not a funky motion, but he just doesn't really drive on the deep ball, and he can throw 35 to 40 pretty well. But he just I don't know if he has the ability to like really power the ball down the field on like the 50+ yard stuff. And so to me, that is something that I'm a little bit not nervous, concerned about. And I think that's an area where he's going to have to really get better, is being able to really power the deep ball. Like he's shown he can drop back, throw on rhythm, and throw a ball 40 yards. And we saw that against Virginia Tech, for example. He dropped back, threw on rhythm, dropped the dime right over top to Kevin Austin, and it was a good ball. But that's not always going to be the way deep balls are. Sometimes you got to throw that post route over top of the safety, and it's got to go 50+. It's not often, maybe 5-6 times a year. That's really it. But he needs to be able to do that. And I think that's one of those things that Tommy Rees is going to have to work with Tyler Buchner on to improve that part of the deep ball. But there's not a whole lot else I worry about with Tyler Buchner beyond just can he develop those things that we talked about, better footwork, better lower body mechanics overall, making sure he's throwing the ball on time, making good reads, making good decisions, all those type of things that we chalk up to him being young. Not everybody gets better with those things. I mean, Ian Book never really got better with those things. I mean, he was kind of the same guy as a fifth-year senior when he was the same way as a rookie in the NFL this year that he was early in his career in regards to he just doesn't really process information quickly. Is that going to be the case with Tyler Buchner, or is Tyler going to be able to do those things? I've seen enough from Tyler in the spring and in games this year that makes me say with more experience, he'll do those things because we've seen him do it, but he's now got to go show it. So that's where you are there. Sean Green says, excuse me. Sean Green says, do you think we should go after Jarrett Bernard, converse from Oklahoma State in the portal? So he is a graduate transfer. So that is a more of a potential for Notre Dame than the other guy. The problem is I don't know if the Notre Dame staff, I don't know if Notre Dame has room at cornerback right now. And that's something that I think they need to figure out real soon because I'm thinking it's like eight or nine corners right now, which is a lot. And that's actually probably a guy beyond what your normal allotment could be. Because the way it works, Sean, is you can only have so many guys at certain positions because what happens is since you can only have 85 guys on scholarship, you sort of set an allotment. We're going to have this many on offense, this many on defense. You're going to have this many at this position, this many at that position. Well, there's positions on the team right now that are over, which means somebody's going to have to be under. Cornerback is already over, and I don't know if you're in a situation, especially since you just added a new kicker and things along those lines, that you can necessarily go out and get a corner, even though that is a position of need. I also believe the staff has a lot of confidence in the younger players that Mike Mickens is going to be able to coach them up and get them ready. So I personally would go after him because I think he's a good football player. I think he's an experienced football player. I think he's a physical corner. I think he would fit the Marcus Freeman defense. So I would like to see them go after him, assuming he has the academics to get into the grad school. I just don't know if they're going to have room for him. That's the question that we have. Notre Dame 2164. Why is tackling such an issue with this team almost on a yearly basis recently? We've had good, talented players and schemes. I just don't know where the lack of fundamental tackling comes from. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And I don't know that I have an answer for you. I mean, there's clearly something going on with the way that they prepare on a weekly basis that results in them just not being a great tackling team. And I don't know if they're not hitting enough in practice. I don't know if it's a lack of fundamentals. I don't know if it's a Brian Kelly problem that Marcus Freeman has to fix. I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think it's gonna be harder to get better. The NCAA has passed rules limiting how much contact you can have and limiting how many periods of contact you can have. They just made a new rule basically implementing some of the stuff they've done for the fall into the spring, where you can only have a certain number of minutes of contact practice in a day. And you look, there a lot of coaches are having a hard time adjusting to teaching tackling without contact. I think there's good coaches out there that have figured out how to do that. But I think there are some things that they need to do to get better at. I'll say the other thing too is I think some of the issues that we've seen with tackling are about new guys not being good enough. I mean, I don't think that Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah really had any problems as a tackler. I can only really think of one missed tackle that he had, and that was against Amari Rodgers last year where he missed him from behind. I don't remember Kyle Hamilton having a ton of tackling problems. I don't remember, I'm trying to think of Jalen Smith. I don't remember him having tackling problems. Manti didn't have tackling problems except against Alabama in 2012. I think part of it, too, is look, DJ Brown's going to have problems in tackling in space because he's just not athletic enough to kind of play with those top teams. J.D. Bertrand's going to have tackling issues for two reasons. One can be corrected, and that is he plays out of control sometimes. The other one is he's just not real long. That's the reason Drew Tranquill had some tackling problems at times, is because he would go to tackle a guy, and that guy's arms are longer than him, and he can kind of get that stiff arm out, and Drew just couldn't couldn't get his hands on. So I do think sometimes I do believe it is a talent problem, but I also believe there's enough fundamental issues that say, hey, we've got to be able to address this and adapt the way that we practice to make sure we're getting there. Eric Espinola says, I am a fan of Coach Freeman, but I did not like his body language when the wheels fell off against Oklahoma State. He needed to rally the troops, but seemed quiet and timid to lead. Better days ahead. Go Irish. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Eric, because what Marcus Freeman did when things went bad is exactly what he does when things are going good. And the one thing that I have never felt worked really is when things started going wrong and a coach that's normally quiet starts going crazy. I don't think that really works that well. You need to maintain a level of calm because it's about, hey, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, and we've got to do this. We've got to make these changes. I don't think Marcus Freeman did anything other than what he normally does. And that's just his personality. And guys who are that way don't really have the fiery, here we go. Lou Holtz could do that because that's who Lou Holtz was. That was his personality. And to me, at the end of the day, I don't think the whole rally the troops thing is really, I mean, at this level, I don't think that's necessarily something that's going to work. Look, at being up in the stands, I could look down across the Notre Dame players and I saw plenty of coaches kind of giving the fiery things. And I saw Marcus Freeman talking to the defense. But what I care more about is why are you making those mistakes? Why are we out of position here? What calls are we making? I want him focusing his time on that. Now, that's the thing he didn't do a lot of, from what I understand, is he made suggestions, he got involved, but it wasn't like I'm taking this thing over. And I think the only thing he could have done differently would have been that. But he admitted leading into the game that because of all the other things going on, he wasn't able to dive into the game plan for the bowl game the way he otherwise would have. So I can understand why you would think that, Eric. I just don't necessarily agree with it. I just don't think that was necessarily the answer. God, Country, Notre Dame, and Barbecue. That is a great name. I love that, by the way. Over under for 2022. Tyler Buchner, 30 passing touchdowns. I'm going to go under. Tyler Buchner, 10 rushing touchdowns. I'm going to go under. I think he's going to be close to 10 and close to 30, but not there. Foskey, 12 sacks. I'm going to go push on that one. Cam Hart, 4 interceptions. I'm going to go under because I don't think people are going to throw at him enough. If I look at that secondary and I'm looking across that secondary, I'm like, I don't mind throwing at that guy and I don't mind throwing at that guy. But number 16 and number 5, I'm not throwing at. Number 16 would be Brandon Joseph, by the way. But I just don't know if he's going to get thrown enough, in my opinion. And I don't I don't know if he's going to get thrown at enough. Diggs, 15 touchdowns, definitely under. Lindsey, 800 receiving yards. I'm gonna go under. Vince is gonna take the over. He just texted me that he's gonna take the over on that one. So so he says what he said was is he thinks Lindsey's gonna have over 800 total yards, right? Not just receiving. So he's gonna go under on the question you asked, God, Country, Notre Dame, Barbecue. And he's going to go under on this question you asked, but he's going to throw the caveat that he thinks he's going to go over 800 total. So that would be also rushing as well, which that I can get behind because he had over 200 rushing yards in 2019 on what was it? I'm going to pull the numbers up. I think it was like 11 carries for over 200. And he had really that year. Give me 1 second to pull this up. So in 2019, Braden Lindsey was Notre Dame's third leading rusher. He had 200 receiving yards or 200 rushing yards on only 13 carries, and he had 2 touchdowns. So I could certainly see him doing something like that where he's got 300 rushing yards and then, 500 5 to 600 receiving yards. Because if they use him correctly, he only needs like 25 catches to get to that 600. He doesn't need a ton of catches. And so, yeah, I could see that if we're talking total, but I'm not going to go there with just receiving. Some of those numbers too, I think, Vince, go back to that one. Some of those numbers too, I think, are a little high to me. Like, especially 30 passing touchdowns is probably the one that I could maybe get my head around a little bit more. And I think it's certainly possible that he could get to those numbers. I'm just not ready to quite jump on board completely yet. And then Diggs 15 touchdowns, I definitely don't see that one. Because I think that would require him to be the guy all the time, and I don't think he's going to be the guy all the time. I think he's going to be part of a three-headed monster at running back. And now you could say, like, okay, I think the combination of him and Audric Estime could maybe get to like 20 touchdowns, maybe like 12 for Diggs, 8 for Estime. Chris Tyree's going to hit his big home run type touchdowns, because that's the thing, is his touchdown numbers are going to be probably the lowest of all of them, just because you're not going to see Chris Tyree getting the ball inside the 5 a whole lot. His touchdowns are all going to have to be from far out. He's going to be kind of a lot like Barry Sanders. You guys remember Barry Sanders had phenomenal numbers in the NFL as a running back, but for whatever reason, when they would get near the goal line, they'd put somebody else in. So he didn't always have like phenomenal touchdown numbers. I'm looking at his numbers now. Like, year 4 he went 9, he was 3, he was 7. Like, one year he led the NFL in rushing with 1,883 yards, and he only had 7 touchdowns. He had 11, 11, 11, 4. The year he rushed for 2,000 yards, he only had 11 touchdowns. That's still a decent amount, but in 16 games, you look at Terrell Davis, for example, the year that Terrell Davis rushed for 2,000 yards, he had 21 touchdowns. The year before, when he rushed for 1,700 yards, he had 15 touchdowns. Barry Sanders in his career, I don't think ever had that many touchdowns. I don't think he ever got to 50. Yeah, he had one time. In 1991, he had 16. He had 14 as a rookie. But after his third year, 9, 3, 7, 11, 11, 11, 4. So when he scored from far out. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see from Chris Tyree this season. So Patrick L. Let me see here. Hold on a second. Patrick Iser. Okay. Any interest in Jimmy Lake? Maybe make him DC or corners coach and promote Mickens, or make him safeties coach and move Lazinski to linebackers with Mason and Freeman helping there. All right, Patrick. I don't have any interest in Jimmy Lake. I'm not a big fan of Jimmy Lake. I think Jimmy Lake's a very good corners coach. I think Jimmy Lake's a pretty good recruiter. I have some issues with Jimmy Lake and how he goes about doing things. I don't think that would necessarily be something that I would be thrilled about. I think it's a big year for Mike Mickens. I think Mike Mickens has a lot to prove this year. I'm very high on Mike Mickens as a coach. But look, he's got to kind of take that next level, right? Develop those young guys, get them ready to go. I think Jimmy Lake would definitely be a great addition to the staff from a coaching standpoint in some capacity. He could coach safeties or corners or whatever the case may be. But there's just some other aspects of Jimmy Lake that I personally wouldn't want on my staff. And I don't want to get too much into that, but I personally wouldn't want him on my staff if I was the one making a call for Coach Freeman. We got a super chat here real quick I do want to get to from Ryan. Gavin, will you explain the difference between a pro style spread and an air raid spread? That's a very, very good question. So first of all, I would never use the word air raid spread. I think that's just a bit redundant. I think the air raid kind of by itself is that's just kind of what it is, right? The air raid by itself is a shotgun based, wide formations, really spreading guys out. It's an offense about throwing the quick game. It's a lot about RPOs. It's about creating isolations. There's the air raid has always, not always, but in a lot of years, it's been like you watch Jared Goff in college, and he'd get hit a lot on pass plays because it was the way that Sonny Dykes, and I think it was Tony Franklin might have been his OC for one of those years. He's a big air raid guy, but they would run a lot of run plays, a lot of RPOs, and then with downfield concepts. It's an offense in its purest form is almost exclusively a passing offense. I mean, it is bubble screens and not even RPO, it's just bubble screens and tunnel screens and quick game and things like that. And they just don't run the ball a ton. You've seen some coaches like Phil Longo really evolve it and have started incorporating the run game more into it. And that's why we saw North Carolina with a couple 1,000-yard receivers last year. And so I think the spread offense has kind of adopted some air raid principles that have allowed some of these passing spread teams to be more effective, but they tend to be more, I call them pro style. I wouldn't call those type of spreads pro style. I think those are more of the college spreads, like Clemson, for example. I would view as a college style, but the difference is really between the air raid and the modern spread are not so much like schematic and RPOs and using the perimeter pass and all that. It really comes down to structural differences and the use of the run game or not. And even that's changing because, as I said, of guys like Longo. But like when you look at a pro style spread, they tend to have more traditional pass blocking concepts. So more normal splits. And the split is basically the distance between the offensive linemen, right? A modern court spread offense, a pro style offense is going to have more modern splits. They'll use their backs more in pass protection. You'll see a lot more tight ends in modern offenses, pro style offenses. Although Oklahoma will use that, but that's more for the run game. And you see it's got a more traditional look to it. You don't see the really crazy wide receiver splits like you see in the air raid. And then the other thing that's the big difference is, and this comes down to because it is a passing thing, not a running thing, is they have super wide splits between the offensive linemen. I mean, if you watch I haven't noticed it at Mississippi State because I haven't paid attention, but even when he was at Washington State with Mike Leach, who's sort of like one of the couple godfathers of it, is like him and Hal Mummy are kind of the godfathers of the air raid offense. Man, they have super wide splits between their linemen. And, it's just kind of meant to spread out rushers. And, it's harder to really attack from width. You can kind of come up the middle, but they've got stuff to attack that and the way that they go about it. They have super long, wide splits because it's passing. It's a passing offense. It's to create wider pass lanes and things along those lines. So those are some of the differences. And I think the pro style spread is a little bit more multiple. Like a pro style spread, which is what we've used to describe Notre Dame, is one that can easily get under center. It can easily go to more 12 personnel. It can easily go to a more run heavy offense. They tend to use more pro style pass concepts, just the different way that they attack the field. So I think those are some of the things that are different, but you know what? Hey, Vince, could you do me a favor? Could you write down Football 101, that list of Football 101s? Can you add to for one of the spring summer videos, right? Breaking down the difference between pro style, spread, and air raid. I think that'd be a great series of Football 101s, is really diving into, like, if we did a series where we just talked about what the spread is, what the air raid is, what is a pro style offense, and then to kind of dive into sort of then do a show where we kind of wrap them all up. I think that'd be a really cool series for us to do this like kind of post Notre Dame spring practice. I think that'd be a great series. So it'd be a lot of fun. So Ryan, that is a great idea. I think that you just gave us. I think that's something that we're gonna want to get into here. So I love that idea. So let's get to the next question, Vince. Where are we at with the next one? John Zabrowski says, question. Mike Elston was big on developing a culture where the defensive line would rotate and every guy plays winning football, and there was no drop-off. Will Al Washington continue that culture? I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen him coach yet, John, to be honest with you. I can't say that definitively. What I can say is that I don't think that's just something that was a Mike Elston only thing. That is something that Clark Lee wanted. Also, it's something that I believe Marcus Freeman is going to want. It's something that I've heard from Marcus Freeman now about that. I think that I would assume Al Washington is going to have that same mentality, but I can't say that for sure because he's coached linebackers, and you usually don't rotate linebackers the way you rotate defensive linemen, especially when you have the linebackers like they had. Now, we did see Ohio State the last 3 years rotate some of their linebackers. Now, Malik Harrison didn't come off the field all that much, but we'd see Baron Browning come off at times, and they played multiple linebackers, so it wouldn't shock me if he's that way. But I can't say for sure that he's going to be that way because we haven't seen him in practice yet and we haven't seen them play a game. But I would be surprised, John, if he doesn't have that mentality. John also asks, who's going to have a bigger impact in 2022, Tobias Merriweather or Josh Burnham? Tobias seems to be able to fit multiple receiver roles, Josh, multiple linebacker roles. I'm going to go with Tobias Merriweather on this one for two reasons. Number one, I think Tobias is a tremendous player. I have Tobias graded out slightly ahead of Josh, and they're two of the 5 top players for me in this class. I think for Tobias, there's a little bit of a greater need, number one, but number two, Tobias is going to come to Notre Dame far more advanced than Josh is. The thing we've said about Josh is because he plays so many different positions and he has to do so much for his high school team. The reality is that he's a still big ball of clay in a lot of ways. I mean, you saw that in the All-Star game when he missed that tackle. It's just like, that's a guy that doesn't quite understand here's the proper technique to come up and make those kind of plays. So how quickly is he going to adapt to that is going to be a question about how quickly he can play. As I've said before, Tobias Merriweather, when he shows up, is going to be one of the better route runners that Notre Dame has. He's a very advanced player for his age, really smart player, understands how to play the game. And of course, he's physically talented, but he really understands the game. So I think the combination of need, God-given ability, and then technical advancement are really the reasons that I think Tobias will get more playing time. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think Josh is going to play. I think he's going to have a chance to play. I don't have a lot of expectations for Josh to step in as a true freshman and play a ton of linebacker. Where I think Josh is going to help Notre Dame out a lot as a freshman is on special teams. And that's kind of where I think he will be. So Laker Irish, who is going to benefit the most from He-Stand's coaching? Fisher or Alt? I think it's going to be Fisher. The thing about Joe Alt is I don't know how much really coaching Joe Alt needs. I think Joe Alt's a pretty advanced kid. I think he's kind of he knows how to play already. I think the person who's going to help Joe Alt the most is going to be Matt Balis and his staff is the people that I think are going to help Joe Alt the most. I think there's some things that Joe can work on about, driving your feet through contact and things like that Coach He-Stand can help him with. But I don't know that Joe Alt necessarily needs a ton of coaching. I think it's just, continue to refine because he is a freshman. But I think with him, it's more about getting stronger. And that's where I think Matt Balis could come into play. I think with Blake Fisher, he's so incredibly talented. There's still a lot of room for his game to grow based on what we saw in the spring, based on what we saw just in the 2 games we saw. He's a pretty smart kid. I think Blake is. And I think the game of football comes somewhat naturally to him because he does have a good football IQ as well as being incredibly physically gifted. But I don't think we've ever seen Blake really just maximize his tools. And he has special tools. And there's a lot to pull out of him. There's a lot of room for improvement that is needed. I also think that Blake needs to be challenged more. And I think sometimes when you're as good as Blake, that sometimes coaches may not feel as comfortable really pushing you. I hope that Coach He-Stand is all over Blake when he gets here and just constantly pushing him. And I hope that Blake is receptive to that because to me, that's the kind of development that Blake needs is I'm going to be all over you. Nothing you do is ever going to be good enough because I think you can be a truly just a special player. And that's kind of how he was with Ronnie Stanley. From what I understand, Ronnie Stanley didn't like Harry He-Stand very much because he was always on him and just nothing is ever good enough and always yelling. But you know what? Ronnie needed that because Ronnie was naturally a bit of a lazy player. And he needed that person to but he was so gifted that he needed someone to constantly push him. He may have hated Harry He-Stand, but Harry He-Stand turned him into the number 6 overall draft pick. Because I don't think Ronnie naturally had that drive to really go be that guy on his own. And he certainly didn't show up at Notre Dame ready to be that guy. He wasn't Joe Alt. I think Blake has more of a natural drive than Ronnie Stanley. I don't think that's not the comparison that I'm making. I think Blake is a pretty hard worker. I think Blake wants to be great, but I think he's so good and he's so talented that I don't think he realizes how much work he needs and how much potential he actually has. And it's going to take someone like Coach Easton to really just ride him all the time. That if Blake takes that coaching well and understands why Coach Easton is doing that, he could be a generational player, which is kind of weird to say that because they just had a generational player like 5 years ago in Quentin Nelson, and you usually don't have generational players that close together. But in this case, I think that could be the case. I think he could really, really, really be a special player, but he needs to be pushed in order to get there. Irish Cubby with the question. He says, just wanted to share with my Irish Breakdown family that I found out last week and that my wife and I are expecting a baby boy in May. Last time Notre Dame won a title was before I turned 1, so maybe history will repeat. Hey, man, congratulations so much. May is the best month to have a son. I mean, I may be biased here since I was born in May, but certainly a great month, man. Congratulations so much. Is this your first, or is this your is this your wife and your first child? I'm curious about that. But either way, man, congratulations so much. Look, and hey, you know what? Go to the merch store, buddy. We got onesies in the merch store, which is the craziest thing to me, that we actually have onesies and that we've sold them. I think I said this in December. Through the first half of the month of December, our most popular item, I swear to God, I swear to y'all, I shouldn't swear to God, but I swear that because I told Vince about this, we laughed about this, but our most popular item through the first half of the month of December was onesies. We sold like 15 onesies. It was insane. It was our most popular item. But you have to get one of those, buddy. But man, I'm so happy for you. I couldn't be more happy for you. It's truly a blessing. And I'll pray for you and your wife as she kind of, these next 5 months, I'm sure aren't going to be a ton of fun for either one of you. But pray that the baby come out and be healthy, and that mom is healthy too. Caleb Collins with a super chat. Thank you, Caleb. How good would the 2015 team been with Malik and Greg Bryant playing together all year? I don't know that Greg Bryant would have added a ton to that, just because I don't know if Greg Bryant ever would have necessarily jumped on board with how things need to be. I think I've had this debate with a buddy of mine, and it's not a debate so much because we agree on it, my friend Jeff, but we've both kind of been of the mindset that if Malik doesn't get hurt, they beat Clemson. I think having Malik, because what Clemson did early in that game was Clemson said basically, you're not going to run the ball on us because it was raining. It was an ugly day. It took Notre Dame a while to adjust their pass concepts. They missed some big opportunities in the pass game. There was a play in the first half where they ran 4 verts and Deshaun Kaiser threw a go route that I think went to Corey Robinson in the end zone, if you remember. He's got Alize Mack running down the backside seam wide open. He just missed him. But they just couldn't run the ball. And so they eventually were able to find some things in the pass game. They hit that wheel route to CJ Procise. They hit a couple crossing routes to Will Fuller and Chris Brown and went for big yards. But they couldn't consistently find a lot of offense. I think had Malik played that game, they would have been able to run the ball more effectively. And then maybe that could have opened up some passing opportunities, and Notre Dame would have had a better chance to really get it done. And I think Malik probably would have been a little bit harder to stop on that 2-point conversion, just because I think you would have had some more things you could have gone to. So then you look and say, well, if they beat Clemson, how do they handle the Stanford game? That's a question. But I've always felt that if Malik, I would say this, I think if Malik and Torian Folston both were healthy, that team is a little bit different. Because what Notre Dame did not have in 2015, they did not have that guy that could get you 2 yards when you needed 2 yards. That was the thing that was missing at running back, because CJ never played running back before. He wasn't a natural running back. He was a home run threat, but he wasn't a natural running back. And Josh Adams was never that guy that would just put his foot in the ground and just hammer it for 2 yards. He was always kind of looking for the home run. So you had a great home run offense, but you didn't have that running back that could just on 3rd and 2 just get you the first down, get behind that line and just put your foot in the ground and go. And Torian was that guy. And I think and Malik was that guy. So I think between those two guys, the offense would have been even more efficient. I don't think you would have lost anything in the pass game. because I think what happened that year, if you go look at the numbers and how things played out, as they got deeper into the 2015 season and Deshaun had more and more experience, they started becoming more and more of a passing team. And I think that took away from just how good they were. And that's why I think they struggled against BC. I think that's why they struggled against Wake Forest. They got a little too pass happy. They went out against Stanford and kind of got back to running the football, and they ran for 299 yards on a top 30 Stanford run defense. They finished that year, I believe, in the top 30, despite giving up all those yards to Notre Dame, and obviously finished that year as a top 5 football team. And they ran for 299 on them and still hit some home runs. So I just think they would have been a more efficient and offense with Malik, and they would have been less, and they wouldn't have missed any explosiveness at all, in my opinion. So I believe that they would have been a better team. Yes, I'm a big believer in that. I think they could have played for the championship that year. I don't think ultimately they would have won it, and they may not have gotten their period because they still had Brian Van Gorder as your defensive coordinator, and they may still have blown the Stanford game, and maybe there was another game they would have blown. But I think they would have beat Clemson, and I think that might have been enough to get them into the playoff. And I don't think they would have beat Bama that year with Van Gorder, but talent-wise, I think that team could have played with anybody, and especially if Malik would have been healthy. And I'm not just saying that because we're tight with Lucky Lefty podcast. I've been saying that for years before Malik and I ever had a conversation. So I'm going to be consistent on that. All right. So Rob Lobo 123. Why is our secondary so bad at blitzing? Other than Hamilton, they did a poor job finishing. Can this be changed by coaching, or do we just need better players? I guess I never really thought about whether or not the secondary is good at blitzing. I remember a play that Ramon Henderson made on a blitz against Virginia. They tried to run a toss play, and he just blew it up. I think a lot of it's about just getting better at timing. They didn't blitz the secondary a ton under Clark Lee. We didn't see a lot of corner fires. I thought Julian Love had a couple nice corner fires in 2017. But I think it's a timing thing is more than anything. And I think that defensive back pressures don't normally work as well as they worked against Notre Dame this year. Notre Dame made it look like, man, why aren't we bringing corner fires all the time? Because every team we play runs a corner fire to get to the quarterback. That was more of a Notre Dame offensive problem than it was. They're just great play calls. But I think timing, Rob, is a bigger issue, and I think timing can be improved. Absolutely. So that's definitely a part of it that I think can be improved upon. Charles Lynch says, Notre Dame brought in a kicker and punter through transfer to compete for jobs, but seem reluctant to bring in a quarterback to compete with Buchner. Is this true? And if so, why? Number one, because they brought in the punter's a walk-on. So there's not a quarterback walk-on that Notre Dame's going to find that's going to compete with Tyler Buchner. And if there is a walk-on quarterback that can compete with Tyler Buchner, that means that Tyler Buchner stinks. So it's a little bit of a different situation. The kicker, again, this is not an all-world kicker. This isn't a guy that's going to be a third-round NFL draft pick next year. This is a good, solid veteran kicker that provides insurance in case Josh Bryant's not ready to go. With Tyler Buchner's proven that he can be a difference maker. I don't understand why people are so looking for reasons to get rid of Tyler Buchner or to have him competition. The reality is Tyler Buchner needs the work. Look, kickers can just kind of go off and kick all practice, right? And they can they can go to opposite ends of the field, and one guy can kick on one thing and the other guy can kick on the other thing, and both kickers can get the same amount of reps. That's not true of a quarterback. You only have X number of reps to hand out to a quarterback. Tyler Buchner needs all the reps he can get to get him ready for that. And so that's the reason that I'm hesitant to bring in a quarterback. And that's the reason I think Notre Dame is hesitant. Number one, there's not a guy that they're going to have a chance to get. They're not getting Caleb Williams. So he's not coming. I don't want Spencer Rattler. I don't want Bo Nix. They're nice players, but they're not. No, I don't want them. They've got a very, very talented quarterback on the roster. What they need to do is develop him. It's exactly what Alabama did last year. They had a freshman quarterback in 2020 that played very little. He threw for half the yards that Tyler Buchner threw for. He threw for a lower completion percentage than Tyler Buchner threw for. He had one passing touchdown. He was minus rushing yards last year. But Alabama knew what they had. They believed in him. They didn't go out and get a grad transfer quarterback or anyone to compete with Bryce Young. They said, this is our guy. We're going to begin the process of transitioning to our next star. That's what Notre Dame is doing, and that's what Notre Dame should do. So in my opinion, I don't think they need to bring in a guy to compete for Tyler Buchner. We've said we may be wrong on that. He may go out there and suck. But Vince and I have been pretty consistent about this. If you're going to bring in a veteran quarterback, it's got to be someone that's like what Hunter Johnson is doing at Clemson. Hunter Johnson went back to Clemson for a sixth year because he has accepted his role. He knows he's not a starter. He knows he's there to, number one, prepare for it because he wants to get into coaching. And I'm told that he had actually, what I read, not told, I read a story and I can't remember who it was from. So I apologize for not properly giving that person credit. I don't remember where I read it from. It was some national site or a Clemson site, but he had actually reached out to Clemson about getting a GA job. Like he wanted to coach. And they were like, hey, there's a way you can do that and still play and come back, be a, in case we need you, right? Because they've got DJ, and I don't have my Vince here in the show to properly pronounce his name, but they've got Cade Klubnik. They're happy with their quarterback situation, but the depth isn't there. Behind those two guys, there's not depth. So you bring in Hunter, and he's sort of your emergency quarterback, but he can learn and develop and kind of take on a leadership role that will then allow him to transition into being a coach. If you could find a situation like that, I'm all for taking a transfer, all for it. But if it's not that, I don't want anything that's going to take away from Tyler Buchner developing as a player. And if you open up the competition beyond Drew Pyne, because Drew Pyne does deserve to be part of the quarterback competition, but if you open up beyond those two, neither one of them are going to get the reps necessary to develop as players. So even though I would expect one of them to win the job, and my prediction is Tyler Buchner wins that job, he's not going to get the reps necessary to be the best player he can be next year. That's just kind of how it works. You're taking away from him the reps he needs to really develop as a quarterback. Irish Gordian Knot. Thank you for the question. I love that name. Brian, now you've got me thinking, how likely is it that with Freeman having control over the D, our issues on offense will get flipped to the D? I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. Look, Nick Saban is very involved with the defense at Alabama, always has been. Kirby Smart's very involved with the defense. The problem that we had on offense at Notre Dame is that Brian Kelly was uniquely the problem, okay? It wasn't a problem of, well, Brian Kelly's really involved in the offense, and so because the head coach is involved, that means it's going to suck. Dabo is very involved with the offense at Clemson, and they've got 2 rings, okay? The problem was Brian Kelly did not invest the time necessary to be as involved as he was because he was always doing so many other things. He didn't study the game the way he needs to. He would often say contradictory things to what the coordinator or what the quarterback coach would say. I've heard this many times from many different players. So it was a unique problem to Brian Kelly. It is not a unique problem to a head coach being involved on that side of the ball. That is not a problem. Almost every Urban Meyer was always involved in the offense at Ohio State and Florida. It was a unique problem for Brian Kelly because he wasn't as involved as he needed to be to really know the game and the game plan and what the defense was doing and all those kind of things. So he would jump in and say some just things that just didn't help. And I think his personality was such that he was a very domineering, demeaning guy at times to where some of the coaches were afraid of him. And I think he kind of liked having coaches on the staff that just did what he said. That's why I think he kept Del Alexander around as long as he did. That's why I think he kept Archie Denson around as long as he did. That's why I think he kept Jeff Quinn around as long as he did, because they just kind of bowed to him and allowed him to say and do and complain about whatever stupid thing he wanted to yell and scream and complain about. And, he liked that. That's not the kind of coach Marcus Freeman is hiring. That's not the personality of Marcus Freeman. There's nothing inherently wrong with a head coach being involved on the side of the ball. Almost every head coach that I can think of that's not like 70-something years old, like Mac Brown, is involved in one side of the ball that is sort of his area of expertise. Lou Holtz, literally, there were games at Notre Dame. You can ask any former Notre Dame player. There were games at Notre Dame during Lou Holtz era where he was literally calling plays on both sides of the ball. He was calling the offense and calling the defense in the same game. There were years where he took over the defense, years that he took over the offense. Well, he almost always called plays on offense. And Notre Dame won a title with that. So it was a Brian Kelly problem, not a head coaching problem. And before we move on to the next question, Ryan, are you ready to go? You ready to jump in here? All right. Going to add Ryan Roberts to the stream today, and we're not going to jump into recruiting just yet because Ryan wants to talk a little Notre Dame football too, and we've got a lot more Notre Dame questions to get to. So we will get to the recruiting questions after we get through these team questions, but Ryan and I talked the other day. I said, hey, man, if we jump into these shows and we still got team questions, are you comfortable doing that? And before I even finished the question, he was like, yes, I'm comfortable doing that. So let me finish the question first, man. Come on, okay? I'm kidding. So Ryan Roberts, our resident director of recruiting here at Irish Breakdown, is with us. And he's got the Irish Breakdown flag in the background, got the IB hat on. I'm digging it, loving it. So, Ryan, thanks for being with us today, man.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Appreciate you having me as always, man. It's a lot of fun.
So I did say at the beginning of the show that I let people know that starting next week, we're going to begin sort of transitioning to our new format. So you will, the next show that will definitely the next show we have scheduled is the Monday show. So that will be me and Ryan talking Notre Dame recruiting. So we're excited about it. And if you haven't been to Irish Breakdown this week, there's so much recruiting content on the front page. Like I wrote an article last night about the 2025 quarterback that Notre Dame lost. Like, man, I got to write something recruiting related. Ryan's doing all the stories. Like, I feel like I'm not carrying my weight now, right? Like, that's not a normal feeling for me. And I love those.
You love those 2025 offers, man.
When I saw it, I was like, oh, come on. What the heck are they offering a freshman for? And then I popped in the film and I'm like, oh, that's why. All right, but we're not going to get into recruiting yet. We still have some team questions. John A1, my man John A1. Hey, John, I still have that coin upstairs, man. That was such an awesome gift. Vince is down there shaking his head, too. That was amazing, man. We really appreciated that gift, and it was great meeting you and your wife down in Arizona. But John says, thank you for the super chat, John. Who are the best pure pass rushers talent-wise on the roster? Does Notre Dame have a linebacker who has a real ability to pass rush with skill and drop in coverage? Well, let's take it one at a time, John. Who are the best pure pass rushers talent-wise on the roster? I'm going to stick with guys that we've seen in college. So I'm not going to talk about Aiden Gobira and Tyson Ford just yet. We've seen them in high school. I'm going to see what they do against college players first. If we were going to talk about the freshmen, I would definitely have Aiden Gobira as part of that conversation, but I want to focus on the guys there. Number one, obviously Isaiah Foskey is there. I think Jason Adamiola has a lot of pass rushing talent. He has to learn to finish better. That's the big thing for me, because a guy with his disruptiveness and the number of – he led the team in pressures according to Pro Football Focus, only had 3 sacks. He's got to finish off the ball better. Now, sacks aren't the end-all, be-all, because if you're forcing a rush throw that gets picked off, or you force an errant throw on third down, you're getting the job done. But I do think Jason has the potential to be a better pass rusher from a production standpoint. I think Justin has a lot of natural skills at it. He doesn't have necessarily the elite athleticism or length of other guys. Here's a guy that I think I would say is in contention from just a God-given ability standpoint to be maybe the second best pass rusher on the defense this year. And before I answer the second part, I'm going to kick this over to Ryan when I answer my question, because I'm going to surprise some people. And I see Vince down there listening, where's he going to go with this one? Riley Mills. I think Riley Mills, especially if he moves out to big end, he is 6'5 plus, incredibly long arms, strong and athletic. And I don't think he was still learning to play inside. He was an end in high school. And it's not a surprise that the one game that he moved out to defensive end, he had 5 total pressures and 2 sacks. It's not a coincidence. I think he has a lot of God-given ability as a power rusher on the edge spot, that if they move him there full time, which we heard they were going to do before Elston left. I don't know if that's still the plan. I hope it is. But I think if you put him at big end with Foskey at Viper and Adamiola inside, I think this pass rush has got a chance to be better than it was last year, in my opinion. And they just had the most sacks by a Notre Dame defense since the 90s this past year. So it's been a while since they've had this number of sacks. I don't know if they'll match the sacks. Sacks don't always equal better pass rushing, but I think this can end up being their best pass rushing defensive line if Riley Mills moves outside, because they got almost no pass rush from the big ends this year outside of when Riley Mills moved out there. They only had, I think, 5 sacks all year from the big end spot, 2 from Tagovailoa, 1 from Aaronsberger, 1 from Nana, and I'm trying to think there was one other one from somebody. But a couple of them were like mop-up time. They've got to get a lot better production there. I really think Riley Mills has that ability. Ryan, what would your answer be for this one as far as who is the best pure pass rushers, talent-wise, on the roster?
Well, I think you need to separate maybe just traits from skill for a second there, but just kind of go off of your Riley Mills thing for a second. On the message board, someone posted something that was just kind of comparing skill-wise, not skill set for a guy like Riley Mills to a JJ Watt. And, obviously everyone's first thing that's going to come in their mind is like, why are you comparing a second-year player going into his third year into a all-time great player? But I think the skill set is what you're really getting at there, right? Like you said, the 6'5", the 290, the length, the ability to work inside and out. And I think that Riley Mills brings a very interesting combination because, even talking about like sub-package opportunities or third down pressure situations, move him inside. Then you got, Ademilola, Justin Ademilola and Foskey off the edges or whatever combination you want to kind of pick on the other side of a guy like Foskey. But to answer the question directly, I would say the reason I prefaced it by saying there's a difference between, the overall traits and the skill of pass rushing is the fact that Isaiah Foskey, from a physical perspective, is just, there's a reason that we're going to be projecting him to potentially be a first-round pick next year. 6'5", vines for arms. He's got linear explosiveness to really threaten the outside track, and that's going to worry a lot of offensive tackles. And right now, you really just see him as kind of a outside track winner. But the more that he can threaten and the more that he develops, he's going to start to figure out, like, hey, here comes the inside counters. Here comes club rip. Here comes ghost move. Here comes all the different things that I can add to my arsenal. And I think that's when you talk about the skill of pass rushing. I think that Justin's probably the best at that right now. Like, I think he has some variance to himself as a pass rusher. He has moves in the toolbox. I still like, although I know they're talking about, Jordan Botelho might play a couple different spots. As a pure speed outside track dude, Botelho's got juice, man. Like, he can threaten offensive tackles, linearly around the track. So those are a couple of guys, but I would say if we're talking about just pure athletic traits, it's easily Foskey. And then if we're talking about maybe the skill of pass rushing, Justin Ademilola, I think, is definitely in that conversation.
If Isaiah Foskey had Justin Ademiola's repertoire, his arsenal, he would be a top 10 to 15 NFL draft pick in my opinion. Lock. He'd be a 14. He had a 10.5 sacks this year, 11 sacks this year on just God-given ability. I'm better than you, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know what I mean? Like, and he did it. Almost every one was just some sort of outside speed to power move. There was no counter. It was just, okay, I'm just better than you are. And he doesn't rush the quarterback as much because he drops into coverage more and does different things. So it's kind of scary to think about how disruptive he could be if he can develop just a couple complementary moves. Justin has that full arsenal. He's just 6'2" and not really super long and those kind of things, which is why he was second on the defense this year in sacks. As a rotation player. So I think there's some potential there. I think the thing that I would say needs to improve in recruiting is once Foskey's gone, depending on what they do with Botelho, they don't have a lot of naturally gifted pass rushers. It's going to be a lot of try-hard guys. It's going to be guys that they got to develop moves. That's why it's so important to get Keon Keeley on campus because Keon's got that natural God-given 10-plus sack ability. I think Aiden Gobira has that as we're projecting in the future. I think Tyson Ford has big boy sack potential, meaning like power end type of sack potential. Those guys have to be developed. So we're seeing an upgrade there. I love the freshman class. The class behind that could even be better as just pure pass rushers. But there's reinforcements coming. The current roster's not loaded with a lot of great pass rushers. I think like I said, Jason, Isaiah, and Riley, to me, have the most God-given ability. When you talk about Justin, he has the best him and Jason have probably the best repertoire. The difference is Justin's better at finishing than Jason is. If Jason can finish better, then he's a 6 or 7 sack guy minimum, in my opinion. And he should be a 10-plus tackle for loss guy. And that's the reason I'm glad Jason came back because He needs to show he can finish with the ball better. We know he can be disruptive. We know he can penetrate. We know he can do all those kind of things. But the production has to match the disruptiveness, in my opinion. And that's going to be the big jump there. The second part of that, when we didn't get to the second part of that one, though, Vince, was about the linebackers. Can you pull that one back up by chance? Here, I think I can find that one. I think I saw where it was. Just give me 1 second, Vince.
There it is.
Okay. Second one, does Notre Dame have a linebacker who has a real ability to pass rush with skill and drop in coverage? Well, Ryan already mentioned one because right now, Jordan Patelho is a linebacker. Now, we don't know if that's going to continue or not. That was kind of done out of necessity. We don't really know where he's going to play. He's a guy, yes, that has some pass rushing ability. I think Bo Bauer, if he can get a gap, has some speed that he can rush, but I don't know if I would call him a great pass rusher. I think he's gotten free when the scheme has allowed him to kind of use his speed to just kind of get through. Being a great pass rusher isn't just being fast. It's you got to have some kind of moves and some kind of arsenal to win. I think there really are. Marist is a guy that flashed that when he was in 2020. I know, Ryan, I know you're real high on his potential as a disruptor in the pass game. Other than that, it's wait till the freshmen show up. I mean, that's from me. Yeah. Sneed, Burnham, guys like that. Junior Tuihalamaka as a sophomore showed some pass rushing ability on third down where he would just kind of line up on the edge and he could win. But I mean, I think it's really the freshman class behind what we talked about. I have never really seen Prince Kollie be used as a pass rusher. I mean, in my head, I want to say I think he probably could because he's really athletic and has strong hands, but I can't project him to do it because I've never seen him be presented in those opportunities to where I could even project that. Part of me thinks he could be because he's a pretty long kid and he's really twitchy, but we just haven't seen him do it. But other than that, I mean, it's Patelho and Marist. Ryan, would you add anybody else to that conversation?
Well, I mean, my initial thought was Jalen Sneed, but obviously if we're excluding the freshman coming in, because I mean, I think Sneed his junior year played a lot on ball anyway, right? Like he was basically a defensive end.
Yeah, he was a 3-point stance defensive end. I mean, he was a hand in the dirt defensive end as a junior. Yeah,
right. I mean, Patello is the natural answer, right? Like we've seen him kind of do a little bit of everything, toying between rover and playing inside and playing, as a true defensive end. Marist was the other guy that I was going to say, but I think Marist, there's a little of a bit of a caveat, like. When I think of this question, I think it's asking like true pass rushing, right? Like I wouldn't say Marist is a true pass rusher. I would say that Marist could be a dynamic blitzer for sure. Yeah. Like blitzing A gaps, blitzing Bs, doing some movement up front and him coming off. Like he can finish because he has some crazy closing speed. And I think that he can get some sacks just because, again, he can cover a lot of ground. And I don't know if there's anybody on the roster right now that's a better coverage linebacker than Marist Lothal,
which is the second part of this question. Right. And that's a kid who was a freshman and I believe was a sophomore in high school, played corner.
Right.
Because he hadn't hit a growth spurt yet. So yes. I mean, and right now we're all, Vince as well, we're all really high on Marist. And the Notre Dame coaching staff is high on Marist. Now he's got to go prove it, right? He flashed it at times in 2020, but he's a little undisciplined. He's got to harness that energy a little bit. And if he can do that, and that's what we talked about yesterday. This linebacking core has a chance to get a lot better. Because if you can put JD inside to Mike, where I think he's more of a natural player than he is in space as a Will, I think that makes two positions better. And then Bo can still be a rotation guy because I'm not as high on Bo as Vince is. Vince is down there just getting mad at me right now because I'm not saying Bo Bauer's phenomenal and going to be a first-team All-American next year. Vince is all on the Bo Bauer train, which I love because Bo's a great kid. And then this is one of those ones where I hope Vince is right. No dancing, Vince. Sorry, man. I don't want you choking. Vince is eating lunch while he's dancing, singing the Bo Bauer, the Bo Bauer train, right? I don't want him choking on his food. But I think Marist can be a difference maker because of that all-around potential. Now he's just got to turn that potential into production. And that really, to me, is the story of the 2020 Notre Dame football team. Are they going to be a 10-2 team that flashes potential but can't get it done in big games? Or does the potential turn into production? Because if the potential turns into production at some key positions, running back, offensive line, receiver, defensive line, linebacker, corner, then this team could be really, really special. But there's right now, as of January 21st, there's just too many ifs for me right now, pre-spring, to say definitively they're going to win all their games. But I think this team's got a chance to be a little bit better than I think that maybe people think. Because I don't think Ohio State's an automatic loss just because they're Ohio State. I would argue Ohio State's got more questions that they got to answer than Notre Dame does. It's just they've got that quarterback receiver combination that has people fired up that Notre Dame doesn't. Notre Dame has the big question. Ohio State doesn't have the big question, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's quarterback. But if you look at the rest of their roster, there's a lot of question marks on that football team. That's where Notre Dame is to me. There's potential for them to be really, really good. But there's right now still way too many questions for me that they have to answer. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I mean, just going back to Marist for a second, I think it's not only a big boost just athletically on the second level, but I'm really excited because when I went back to last summer, just looking at some of the notes I had, because he was a draft eligible player. I didn't think he was going to declare, but I just wanted to take a look at him. Like when you watch him against Alabama, I felt like there was a lot of speed advantages in Alabama's favor in that game, right? I don't think that there was a huge advantage between the running backs and tight ends and all that type of, conversation between Marist and what he was. And Marist is a guy that is explosive and he will hit, which gives me a lot of hope. He's not a guy that's timid. Although he's played a lot more in space in high school, he's a guy that will throw his weight around a little bit. And I agree with you about the Ohio State thing, because I was just looking, at the roster, just a sneak peek a couple of days ago, actually. Obviously, they lose Petit Frere at left tackle. They got DeJuan Jones back, but that offensive line was not great last year in general, to be very honest with it. And then they lose a couple players. And then the defense, was a train wreck last year. So let's definitely not put it automatic.
I saw Pro Football Focus and I know you're going to love, so I know how to tweak Ryan, and he and I have similar things that we get tweaked by. Pro Football Focus had Zach Harrison ranked ahead of Isaiah Foskey, and they talked about how he had this great winning percentage of pass rusher. And I'm like, at some point in time, if you're a great pass rusher, shouldn't you actually get sacks? Isaiah Foskey has more sacks in 2021 than Zach Harrison has his entire career. He had 3 sacks last year. He's this great pass rusher, and I'm just like, what? He had 3 sacks last year. Isaiah Foskey had more sacks combined than the 3 5-star ends that Ohio State had. Zach Harrison, the freshman JT, and then Tyreek Smith. He had more sacks than all of them combined, which I just find hilarious. That, so again, their defense, big problem. And Jim Knowles is a great defensive coordinator, but he's also a very complex defensive coordinator. And his defenses have always struggled in his first year. Yeah. And so I don't think you're going to see them. He's not going to have the same one-year impact that Jeff Hafley had, for example. Because Jeff Hafley is a lot like Marcus Freeman and Clark Lee, which is let's trust the athletes. Let's put them in position. Let's teach them how to play. Let's make sure we're sound and then fly to the ball. That's how. And so that's the talent could kind of win. Jim Knowles is more in the, I don't want to say it because it's going to sound wrong. He's more in the complexity side of things. I was going to say Brian Van Gorder, but that would have been a huge disrespect because he's actually a good football coach. Van Gorder's terrible. But the complexity aspect of it is why. And so I don't know if they're going to necessarily be this elite defense day one. There's a question I wanted to get to, Ryan, that I think is a great question because it's kind of draft related a little bit.
Okay.
Italian loving the Irish. By the way, great name. He asked this question. I'm a Jets fan who has followed Zach Wilson from last year at BYU. I see a lot of Wilson in Buchner. I'm going to make one comment. The one area where they are not even close, Tyler Buchner has a good arm. He doesn't have a great arm. Zach Wilson, from a pure power standpoint, can throw bombs.
Yeah.
That is not Tyler Buchner. Beyond that, Ryan, what are your thoughts on that comparison?
I don't really see it too much. Like you said, you kind of got into the velocity side of everything. Zach Wilson had a really quick release. He generates velocity just, very easy. And it's a compact release. I feel like Buckner's release is a little unorthodox to a degree. I think that it's a good arm. I would classify it definitely there. Athletically, I think Zach Wilson was a good athlete. So, don't take this the wrong way. Zach Wilson is a plus athlete on the NFL level. I think Buckner's a special athlete, though. He is a legit guy that you want to get involved in the quarterback run game. I think that you can run a little zone read with Zach Wilson from time to time. Obviously, things off the, RPO concepts, do all that type of stuff. But, literally, Tyler Buchner, you want to run quarterback power, and you want to get him downhill because he's that special of an athlete. So, size-wise, I think Buchner is also a little bit smaller. I think Wilson's 6'2.5", somewhere in that ballpark. I think Buchner's around 6'1", 6'1.5", somewhere in some change like that. So stylistically, I don't really get it a ton. And I think that, again, I think Buchner's a much better athlete, but then Wilson obviously has the advantage as far as just pure passing prowess, but also just the tools to be an excellent passer.
Got a couple more Tyler Buchner questions I want to get to just so we can kind of get these out of the way since we're on the conversation. John Zabrowski said, I thought TB12 had a 50-yard in the air throw this year to Kevin Austin. You're thinking of the Virginia Tech throw. I think that was the only bomb that I know he threw a deep shot to him early in the year. Neither of them were 50 yards. They were hit your drop, throw it. I think the one to Kevin Austin went about 42, if I remember correctly. So if there was a bomb earlier in the year he threw, maybe, but he didn't throw any that I remember being that far. Ethan O'Connor says Tyler Buchner seems to throw a ball that dives a little. The nose of the ball is pointed at the ground more than I would like. At times that is the true, but again, that's what I come back to. That's a footwork thing, because what happens is your feet determine how open or closed your hips are. How open or closed your hips are is going to determine the trajectory of the football. So what happens is if your hips open too much, it causes your elbow to dip, which causes the nose to go up, right? If your hips are closed more, and this is the problem Tyler had, his feet would be to the point where his hips stayed too closed. And so if your hips are too closed and you start to come, because of your hips are sort of holding your arm back, you tend to drive it down more. And so that's where the footwork has to improve for Tyler. If the footwork improves more and he which gets his hips in a better place, then you're going to start to see him not have as much of that, right? Because there are quarterbacks who drive that thing low every time. There are quarterbacks that do that. Tyler does that sometimes. And every time I see him do it, I can look at his feet and say his feet were the problem, because your feet determine whether your hips are going to be open or closed. And that's why I always say you build a quarterback from the ground up, not from the top down, right? It's got to start with the feet, which get to the hips, and the core, which then gets to the arm. Okay, now there are some guys that have this God-given ability to where, I mean, they can just do things with their arm. Brett had worse work I've ever seen from a big-time quarterback. But it didn't matter because he had just a cannon connected to his right shoulder. John Elway didn't have great mechanics a lot in his NFL career, kind of because he had to not have good mechanics because he couldn't set in the pocket because the line was always so bad. But it didn't matter because his arm talent was so special. Most quarterbacks aren't that way, especially as young college guys. I mean, if you look at Aaron Rodgers, one of the things that really helped Aaron Rodgers develop as a player, in my opinion, was working with Jeff Tedford. Because at Cal, Jeff Tedford taught Aaron Rodgers the importance of footwork, release point. He was an old school West Coast guy that understood the importance. So then as Aaron got older and as he got stronger, he had that natural technical foundation to where when he freelanced, he never loses that foundation. He could run around, but as soon as he sets his feet are right where they need to be, right? He's got impeccable technique. And so that allows him to do some of those things. Again, not everybody can be that way. So with Tyler Buchner, I kind of went around on this one. With Tyler Buchner, to me, it's not a natural problem, Ethan. It's not something that is always going to be there. It is a technical problem that can and should be corrected relatively easily as he gets more experience. But it really begins with the feet. And once he fixes those, he's going to be fine.
I also wonder, Brian, sometimes when guys are just a little too tensed up, things are moving a little fast. Sometimes that grip gets a little hard, on the football, and that can cause the thing to die a little bit too. If you're just gripping it a little too tight, if you're just not sure about where you're going, sure about your process,
Right.
So.
And we saw that because when Tyler, if you look at that first half of the game against Virginia Tech, that wasn't an issue. I mean, that go route that Kevin Austin, that's not going to be an issue because, again, the release point's naturally going to be up here because you're dropping it down. But you look at that seam throw that he had to Avery Davis. I mean, that sucker was perfect trajectory, right on the line, had some zip. There was a couple misses he had in that game where if you actually go look at the slow-mo of those plays, I mean, the ball looked beautiful. It just wasn't anywhere close to a receiver. But it came out of his hand really clean, nice, beautiful spiral, all those type of things. It just didn't go near anybody. So, I that's a good observation, Ethan, that you saw that because it will dive at times, especially on some of the outcuts. But again, that's a footwork thing as opposed to an issue that's just always going to be there. Because for some quarterbacks, for whatever reason, their hand size, their grip, the things that they've just been taught their whole lives that you can't really deprogram, it leads to that. It leads to them sailing the ball all the time or driving it into the ground. But usually when that's happening, when the ball's noticeably going one or the other, it has to do with the release, the hand release. but the release is dictated oftentimes by what you do with other things. Timeout Tom said, you mentioned that Rees can only work with quarterbacks in the film room and conditioning during the offseason. Is there anyone on staff that can work hands-on during that time period? No, you can't do – you're not – by rule, you're not supposed to be doing football-specific drills in the offseason with coaches. So Matt Bayless is not going to be out there, and his staff's going to be out there working on him with his mechanics. What you do is you've taught them certain things, and it's up to them to go rep it and teach it and work on it. And that's just part of being a college athlete. I mean, it's the same way in the NFL. There's times in the year where NFL coaches are not allowed to work with players. They just can't do anything with them. You take what you were taught and you drill it and you work on it and you prepare yourself. And that's why a lot of these guys have quarterback coaches now. I mean, Tyler Buchner's got a quarterback coach. When he goes home for a little bit during the summer, he's going to work with that quarterback's coach. When he goes, for home during the winter, I bet you he was working with his quarterback coach. What you need to make sure you're doing, however, is that you have a quarterback's coach back home that's emphasizing the things that you're being taught to do in the offense that you're running at Notre Dame. That's where a lot of guys have problems. They get these quarterback coaches that just, this is what I teach. Well, that's fine, but that's not what you're being taught at your college. And so now you're getting conflicting messages. So it's imperative for all young quarterbacks that if your child's a quarterback, find a quarterback's coach that's going to teach similar things to what he's going to be asked to do for his high school team or for the college he's going to, because otherwise your kid's going to be a confused mess. Or if your kid's an incredibly gifted player and you can kind of dictate to the team what they're going to do, you still need to make sure that they're working together to make sure that they're being taught things that work with what they do. So that's my little public service announcement for any parents of future quarterbacks. Alan Watson with a super chat. Thank you, Alan. I wish Coach E much success up north, but I hope Coach Harbaugh doesn't bolt for the NFL in the next couple of weeks. Ryan, any thoughts on that?
I mean, he's being rumored everywhere right now. There seems to be like a heavy opinion that the Miami Dolphins are a true player in the Harbaugh sweepstakes here. So
what do you make of Stephen Ross saying that he would never do that to Michigan?
I
thought that was such a dumb comment. You're not going to do it if you think Jim Harbaugh is the best coach for your team. You're not going to hire him. You're not going to do what's best for your organization because you don't want to hurt Michigan. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of.
In the National Football League at the highest level, when you're, I mean, let's call it what it is. The franchise has been a mess for a long time. Like, it's not been great for Miami. So I talk to my dad pretty frequently because he is a Miami Dolphins fan about, a couple of these things. I don't even know if he really wants Harbaugh, but I think it's real. I think it's very real that he could leave here. I know Michigan's, he's a Michigan guy. It was a dream job, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that Harbaugh wants to get back into the NFL at some point. So I think that it's a very big possibility that it could be.
And he's never going to be a hotter commodity than he is right now.
Absolutely not.
In my opinion. And the other thing that's interesting is Michigan just fired their president, who is Jim Harbaugh. That's who Jim Harbaugh had a lot of beef with. Apparently he was a little too flirtatious with someone at the school. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I despise that man so much for what he did last year, but we need to get into that. But what comes around goes around. And that's the guy that kind of beefed with Harbaugh and didn't like Harbaugh and didn't like the fact that Harbaugh and the team were fighting for them to have a season last year because he was one of those people that wanted to cancel the 2020 season and all that kind of stuff. So I think Jim Harbaugh is kind of enjoying that demise probably quite a bit. But I am curious how that is going to maybe change at all, if it does at all, sort of what Jim Harbaugh does. Because I was actually thinking he might be more prone to leaving with the previous president because there were some issues there. I'm curious, depending on who they hire, if that has any sway on what he does.
Do you know if there's a timetable for the new president? You're not sure about that.
I don't know. I haven't seen that. No, I saw that the guy was fired and the board voted him out. This was like about a week or two ago. So I'm very curious about that. Chris Hawk with question 1 of 2. So Vince, do you see his second one on there? We're ready to rock and roll. Question 1 of 2. I'm a Marcus Freeman fan, but is it just me or has his defense lacked discipline and being assignment correct too often? Also, I'm concerned about his lack of ability to stop the run, so to speak. So I want to get to part 1 first, Vince, and then we'll get to – oh, wait a minute. No, here we go. Okay, so he's building onto it. Florida State, Toledo, and Oklahoma State seemed to struggle early, but figured out the defense in the second half. I'm really concerned about his ability to make adjustments off his opponent adjustments. Okay, so first of all, there's something interesting about those 3 games. Number one is the third game, he wasn't the defensive coordinator. He admitted, and people around the program admitted to me in conversations, that Coach Freeman was doing a lot of other things. He was being a head coach. He was spending time in the offense, doing recruiting, trying to get the recruiting class signed and all those kind of things. He wasn't involved in the game planning and in the practice every day the way that he was as defensive coordinator, and he didn't call the plays. So I don't think we can put that one on Marcus Freeman. The first 2 games were, in fact, his first 2 games. I mean, They admitted that they had assignment mistakes, and I think that there's no question about that. I think the only other time that I remember that being a problem was the North Carolina game, where they gave up 2 big plays on pump fakes. One was an illegal pick that wasn't called. The other one was just Ramon Henderson blowing a coverage. Well, he has since been moved to safety, and I hope that they keep that. I would be really disappointed if they moved him back to cornerback. But when I look at the Notre Dame defense the rest of the season, Chris, I mean, I see a defense that did not struggle stopping the run. I look at a defense that after the first game, they gave up 264. They gave up 124 yards rushing to Toledo. 67 of them came on one play where there was an assignment mistake. Marcus Freeman made that mistake. He owned that mistake, and they corrected that mistake. The next week against Purdue, they gave up 57, 78 to Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a top 10 rushing team this year, and Notre Dame held them to 78 yards. They held Cincinnati to 93 yards on 30 carries. They held Virginia Tech to 127 yards. USC only had 129. A lot of that came late in the game when Notre Dame was up big, and they were kind of letting USC run the ball, because if you're going to run on us, you're not scoring quickly, and we're going to win the game. North Carolina was a bad game, 224. A lot of scrambles in that game. The running backs didn't do a whole lot. It was a lot of Sam Howell scrambling. I think Sam Howell had over 100 yards rushing that game. Then the next week, they gave up 166 to Navy. That's about 70-plus yards below Navy's season rushing average. So the 166 is a lot of yards, but you gave up 3.02 yards per rush, and you held them. I'm going to look at Navy's total. At the time, it was about 80. I'm going to see what Navy's total was at the end of the year. Navy at the end of the year was 226.4, so it ended up being about 60, literally 60 yards below. At the time of the game, it was about 80, and obviously that 166 dragged that number down. So, you look at the next 3 games, Navy went for 345, 218, and 196. So clearly they held them down. That was the second lowest rushing total of the season for Navy. The only time they rushed for fewer was against Air Force. And if you look at the history of that rivalry, Navy always struggles to run the ball. They ran for 90 yards against Air Force the year before that. They ran for, there was like 1 year also in there, 129 against Air Force in 2018. They've always kind of had a hard time running on Air Force. Why? Because nobody knows what they do more than our Air Force and Navy and Army. So I think they did a pretty good job stopping the run in that game. The next week, Virginia had 82, Georgia Tech had 128, and Stanford had 55. I mean, so after the second game of the year, you had one bad game against North Carolina. Other than that, Notre Dame's run defense is pretty good. I don't chalk up they did not stop the run very well against Oklahoma State. The second half of the game, they gave up scrambles whole game, gave up a lot of quarterback draws and scrambles, but even the second half, they were kind of hitting that outside zone right outside the blitzes. Notre Dame just kept blitzing up the middle. Oklahoma State was running outside of it. But again, that was not a Marcus Freeman defense. And so I guess I just don't see it the same way, Chris. I think that their adjustments were pretty good this year. I think that they had good game plans early. I think they did for the most part, make good adjustments at the second half. They didn't make good adjustments against Oklahoma State. And if you remember correctly, against Florida State, that big run that Florida State had was in the first half. They didn't give up another big run like that the rest of the game. It was some of the big plays in the pass game that hurt them. And it was their own offense kind of just, tuck and tail in this. After they jumped up 38-20, the offense kind of called off the dogs, which they shouldn't have. So I guess I just don't agree with the premise, Ryan. I don't know if you have a difference of opinion on that, but that's just kind of where I'm at. I think Marcus Freeman's defense this year was pretty damn good. They finished in the top 10 this year in efficiency, right? They finished this year in the top end of the season, I think like 12th in scoring before the bowl game, because we're looking at the Marcus Freeman defense. So I think it's pretty darn good defense this year, in my opinion. They had a couple games, but other than that, they're pretty good this year.
Yeah, I think especially with the ones that Chris illustrated here, the Oklahoma State game, like you said, let's toss that out for a second because he wasn't the main voice of the defense. Florida State Toledo, I mean, we have to remember it was as the first two games, you're a brand new defensive coordinator that's still implementing your stuff, right? Still getting guys comfortable. And then I think a couple of the other things too, Brian, might be like a semi-different layer, is the fact, like you mentioned, Sam Howell. Sam Howell had a great game. Like, can we give an offensive guy some credit for a second? Like sometimes you're going to get beat just because offense guy might be better than some of your defenders. Like we already mentioned and illustrated with the Maris Loifow thing. It's like last year, I thought J.D. Bertrand had a lot of good moments, obviously, and I thought linebackers in general had some good moments, but there is a deficiency as far as speed on the second level and athleticism on the second level. They took advantage of that, off of some scrambles and in the quarterback run game a little bit in North Carolina. The Josh Downs, I know, had a big play in that game. Josh Downs is a really good football player.
And that was an illegal pick. I'm still going to be mad about that because that was an illegal pick. They flat out ran and just took Tariq Bracy out. He's got to do a better job of getting over top of that. I get all that, but I get mad whenever that happens in Notre Dame because of 2014.
Yeah.
Because the Florida State game, so now every time an illegal pick happens and it doesn't get called against the other team, I get super salty about that. Salty about that.
And then the other one I was thinking about, which I just saw the highlight the other day. I think I may have been watching the USC game actually again. It was the Drake London double move or Clarence Lewis. I think he's in cover 3. It looks like because he's zone turning, and then for some reason he decides to bite up on the out, the fake out cut, and then it's up the sideline. I'm just like, that's not a coaching problem. Like, you called cover 3 against the double move. It's not a scheme problem. Right. You're calling a coverage, which should have eliminated that double move. That should have been no problem at all. And I think, again, that's a deficiency to a degree. It's bad awareness by, Clarence Lewis in that situation. And also it's the fact of like, hey, Drake London's a good football player, man. Like he made a play. At some point, you also have to take into account, like at some point, the other team's best players are going to make some plays at times. Like that's just going to happen. So
good question, Chris. I like those kind of questions, and again, I like that. So Vince, what do we got next? Laker Irish, how long do you think Tommy wants to stay at Notre Dame for? He's already been here a while. Does he want to be head coach in the next 5 years? I don't know if he wants to be head coach. I believe Tommy Rees wants to go coach the NFL. That's what I think. I think everything about what he does schematically, everything about what he says, who they hire. I mean, if they hire the people that I'm hearing they're going to hire at running back, it's going to be someone with an NFL background. And which means every single coach on offense has either played in the NFL or, in everyone else's case, coached in the NFL. Chancey Stuckey being the guy that played in the NFL. So I just think that's where Tommy Rees wants to be. I think that's the level he wants to coach at. So I don't see him. If he leaves, honestly, I don't think it's going to be for another college. I'm going to be at the NFL. I think Tommy Rees loves Notre Dame. It's his alma mater, but I don't think he is. I think he also has his own aspirations. And barring Marcus Freeman leaving in 2 years for the NFL, which I don't see happening, I think Marcus Freeman's more of a college guy. I think that's the next move for Tommy Rees, more so than becoming a head coach, in my opinion. Caleb Boyles, who do you see as leading receiver, biggest passing threat, excluding Mayer? 20 tackles for Sneed, over under. First part, I'm going to cop out a little bit here, Caleb. Let me see spring ball first. The easy answer is who's the leading receiver? Okay, it's going to be one of the guys we've seen. It's going to be Styles or Avery Davis or Braden Lindsey. But, as I said, let me see the kind of progress Deion Colzie makes in the spring, right? So I want to get through spring first before I kind of dive into that because I want to see who steps up and starts making plays in the spring. And then the second one, 20 tackles for Sneed, over under. I'm going to go over just because I think he's going to play special teams. I think that there's some games on the schedule next year that Notre Dame is going to crush the team that they're going to play. I think he's going to get some production during those games as well. And then I think eventually he's going to have some sort of role, either as a nickel or that kind of thing. But, when I look at Notre Dame's schedule next year, I look at Marshall. If he doesn't have 3 or 4 tackles that game, I'm going to be a little disappointed, between special teams and getting on the field. Cal, with all due respect, is a game you should be able to get your backups on the field at some point in time. You got UNLV at home. They're terrible. That's a game that you could see him getting a few tackles. So Navy, They're going to stink again. And I could see him having some if they do to Navy what they should, and they've done almost every year in recent history. I mean, they've blown Navy out multiple years in a row now. That's another game where a guy like Jalen Sneed, you get 4 or 5 tackles. So just on mop-up duty alone, and that doesn't include Stanford, who I think is terrible. They're not going to be any better next year, really. They lost both of their running backs, and that was about the only good thing they had this year besides a bunch of talented but always beat-up receivers. Their offensive line is a hot mess. That's a game that Notre Dame at home should win convincingly. I mean, I could see him getting 12 to 15 tackles just in those games alone, and that doesn't include, him potentially getting 5, 6, 7 tackles on special teams. So I think if, in those counts, I mean, they don't – in college football, they don't separate special teams tackles and, defensive tackles. So I'm going to go over for him, in a minimum 13-game season with several blowouts and him playing special teams. Yeah, I think 20 tackles is a good over, number to set for an over-under. I'm going to go with the over on that. Ryan, what say you?
I'll go over as well. Obviously, the caveat there is special teams impact. I would be shocked if Jalen Sneed is not an impact player on special teams with the speed that he has. So I think that's an easy one. I'm going to go Lorenzo Styles with the leading receiver. I'm just in on Lorenzo Styles, man. I think he's very, very talented, and he ended the season off on a high note. I think he's going to transition that momentum into the spring and into the fall. I think that he has all the talent to be a 800-900 yard receiver next year. I think it's possible. I think it's very possible.
The only reason I am hesitant on that, Ryan, and the only reason I'm not willing to go there with you yet is I think he could be their best receiver. But Notre Dame's leader in receptions and or yards each of the last every year since Will Fuller in 2015 has been the boundary receiver. It's just the nature of the offense. That position is geared to get more touches than the X or the Z. And every year of Tommy Rees being involved in the offense, the boundary receiver has led the team in receiving receptions or yards. The only exception was this year when Michael Mayer actually led the team in receptions, but Kevin Austin led the team in yards. So that's the only reason I have hesitation. It's not that I don't disagree with anything you just said. It's just the nature of the offense. One position is geared more towards that volume. And I also think you're going to have a role for Braden Lindsey as well, Avery Davis. So there's at least enough veterans there that may take away from what Lorenzo could produce if he was just the guy. And then when you look at the boundary, although if they're smart, they'll find ways to get Lorenzo into the boundary next year too, because teams can do that. If you're running the right kind of offense, you don't have to have a 6'4" guy in the boundary. You can have a Lorenzo Styles getting 10 to 12 snaps there as well as part of a speed package. Or you put Michael Mayer back there and you have Lorenzo on the field with Avery Davis and Braden Lindsey at times. So, I mean, there's things you can do, but my only hesitation, Ryan, is not that I disagree with anything you said. It's just the nature of the Notre Dame offense and what it's been.
Well, I know obviously, and you're going to stick with that because that's what you've seen, right? You don't know any different. Do you think having a Buchner, though, that there's a lot of like RPO action?
I hope so.
Put some bubbles. Maybe we're going to hit some quick spot routes, like different stuff like that. Maybe the offense will evolve a little bit to fit the skill set.
I hope so. And that's partly why I want to see the spring first. Because if it wasn't that, I would just say Deion Colzie. I would just say, look, it's going to be Deion Colzie because the boundary receiver's been that guy, right? I want to see how it evolves. I want to see if they're running more RPOs, we're going to see the slot get more touches. We're going to see the X get more touches. I mean, Lorenzo Styles led the team Kevin Austin had that big play late in the game when the game was already over, but when the game mattered, when the game was still in doubt, Lorenzo Styles was their leading receiver that game. He had 6 catches for over 120 yards, right, against Oklahoma State. And at least 3 of them off the top of my head were RPOs, where he got the ball in space and was able to go do something with it. So, but that was an anomaly. We didn't see them do that all the time. And I can't say, well, that's going to carry over next year because I hope they don't throw the ball 68 times every game next year. Right? Speaking of the air raid. But I need to see the evolution of the offense. I need to see Deion Colzie. I just need to see more of it before I'm comfortable really putting that out there, because I know if I put that out there, some people are going to hold on to that, and then like, well, I could say it's going to be someone else after spring, but when that person that I said in January isn't the leading receiver, well, you said last year that it was going to be so-and-so. Okay, well, let me see spring ball first. So That's my answer to that one. Gavin Alexander, looking back, who do you think was the best quarterback of the Kelly era? Golson pre-Yips, Kaiser, Book, Gunnar, Keel. Come on now. If we're going to go individual season or best overall, I don't know how you can say anyone other than Ian Book. I'm not a big Ian Book fan, but nobody played as long as him. Nobody had the overall production of him, and nobody had the record he had. Now, he played on better teams than anybody else, but Ian Book didn't get suspended for a whole season like Everett Golson did. He didn't. Ian Book didn't have a mental collapse where he ended up finding himself benched by the end of the year like Everett Golson had. He had a much better attitude and was a much better team player than DeShone Kizer was in 2016. So it's the competition is not that hard. If you're looking at it, to me, if you're going to go for the entire career, it's hard for me to go with anyone other than Ian Book. If you're going to go individual season, then I think you can maybe make a case for Kizer in 2015.
Yeah.
If you're going to go individual, because his numbers and he ran the ball a bunch, threw the ball a bunch.
Talented.
But even then, I think you could make a case that he didn't play the whole season, so it's hard for me to say that. But the best stretch of football we saw from a quarterback at Notre Dame, in my opinion, was Ian Book's first 5 starts. He threw for he completed over 70% of almost 75% of his passes. He was averaging over 300 yards passing per game. They were torching people with RPOs. Just a pure 5-game stretch, that was the best. And if we're just going to go with a 3-game stretch, that's a no-brainer. That's Malik Zaire. He was absurd in his 3 starts at Notre Dame. But career, Ian Book, best individual season, I'd probably go Kizer in 2015. Ryan, what say you?
Yeah, you have to defer to Ian Book, but I think that John put to get to Gavin, he was referring to who was the best or who should have been the best, which I think is a good. DeShone Kizer should have been the best. He was the most talented of that group in my
NFL.
Phil?
No.
Oh,
Everett Golson. If Everett doesn't get nobody threw the ball the way Everett threw the ball. We're talking college, right? See, this is where you got to deprogram. You're an NFL draft guy. You're like my buddy Tony. Best NFL draft prospect, no brainer. It's DeShone Kizer. Maybe even more than Phil, because DeShone's more of a natural pass, like a pocket passer, where Phil kind of is a bit of a freelancer kind of guy. But we're just college quarterback. Everett Golson threw the best ball of any Notre Dame quarterback since Jimmy Clausen. Flat out. It's just he never mentally recovered from that missed season. If he would have played consistently and not missed that season, which meant all that work with George Whitfield, who should have his quarterback coaching license revoked permanently, okay, I think the best would have been Everett. He threw, and because he was such a dynamic playmaker. He also is someone that his teammates liked and respected much more than DeShone.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big layer, too. It's like development. And I'm not even talking from an NFL draft perspective. It's like you don't know the inner workings of a player and how hard he's going to work, right? Like that's the big layer to it. DeShone Kizer, I'm just talking about raw tools. The kid was, had a cannon for an arm, was a good athlete, big frame, like everything. The makings of a guy that should have been, when we're talking about NFL drafts, like he should have been a first-round pick. Like that's what type of talent he was. The problem was that he was just missing something to the equation. But when we're talking about, for me, like if I could deprogram him and then get maybe a little more work ethic into him, or at least to understand the finer points of playing a quarterback and what it means to be a quarterback, kid should have been phenomenal. And he had moments of being really good, but man, just talent level, Kizer had it all, honestly, from a physical perspective, just not a mental perspective.
I'd still go with Everett because I think Everett was such a more dynamic playmaker. I think from an NFL draft standpoint, just a God-given ability, 6'4", 230. It's DeShone Kizer. I just feel at the college level, Everett had special tools. But he also was this right here. Same thing with DeShone. Both of the guys that we're talking about had problems. They just for different reasons, right? For different reasons. Yeah. But I'd probably go with Everett on that one. Phil could have been in that conversation, but I don't think Phil would have been a very good quarterback in Notre Dame because I don't think they had any concept of how to coach him. None. That's my fear there. I don't think Tommy Rees had any idea how to coach Phil Dracovic, which is why he didn't like Phil and why he drove Phil out. I mean, everybody blames Chip Long for that. I'm going to say it again for the millionth time. I'm saying with 100% certainty, and I don't often say that, Phil Dracovic did not leave Notre Dame because of Chip Long. Chip Long was fired over a month when Phil decided to leave. He went through all the bowl practices, was there for the bowl game. Chip had already been gone, and then he left afterwards. Why? Because of Tommy Rees and Brian Kelly. End of story. That's the case. Because I don't think Tommy had any idea how to coach a kid like Phil. None. And so I don't think we would have seen Phil develop the way he could have from, at Notre Dame. So that's why I don't put him in that conversation.
I also kind of wonder what type of season that Zaire would have had if he never broke his ankle. Can you imagine some of the numbers? Because I mean, like you said, he was off to a crazy start that year. I just wonder what kind of numbers he would have put up just like in a vacuum in that season.
I think he would have been about at least 800 yards rushing. I think he would have had at least 2,500 yards passing. And then once CJ Procise broke out along with him, because we didn't see CJ really break out yet. Because Josh Adams actually kind of got more carries in that Texas game when Torian went down. Then CJ and him both. Then it kind of became the CJ show. But I mean, Malik was gone the next game, and that was really before the run game really took over. But I would have really liked to have seen what that team could have been if Malik doesn't go down. Matthew Lowe with Harry Heastand back. Do you see the run game going to more pin and pull and power over inside-outside zone? If so, which running back would best fit the scheme change? Go Irish. So Harry Heastand was actually – this is a good question, Matthew. Harry Heastand was brought in 2012 to get rid of the pin and pull that they ran under Ed Warner. They were a pin and pull team under Ed Warner. They wanted to go to more of a zone team under the new change. So Harry came in, and he was an inside-outside zone guy. When Chip Long came in, they were inside and outside zone, but they implemented the G scheme and the buck sweep concepts, which Notre Dame was really good at the buck sweep in 2017. They had at least 3 or 4 home run touchdowns in 2018 on the buck sweep, but their bread and butter those seasons was inside outside zone. The play that we showed the other day in our breakdown of the 80-yard touchdown run by Josh Adams against USC, that was an inside zone play. He just cut it right back behind Alex Bars and right out the gate. So they'll still be, in my opinion, an inside-outside zone team. I don't think anyone can just run inside and outside zone, in my opinion. I think you need some sort of pin and pull adjustment. If it's, counter's nice, but counter, I'm not really talking about counter. I think if they go inside, outside zone this year and develop a kind of a counter play, whether it's a true, GT counter or guard tight end counter or some sort of wrap concept, where it's you're just pulling one guy, like a tackle wrap, guard wrap, something like that. But I think they need to have some sort of outside pin and pull, buck sweep, or G scheme sort of implementation. I think you can do that. The Notre Dame has shown they can do that. They ran inside, outside zone, a buck sweep all day long in 2017. And that was the best running game we've seen at Notre Dame in 20 years. So I would like to see a little bit more of a combination of both, Matthew. But with Harry Heastand back, they're going to most likely continue the inside-outside zone. That's what Harry teaches. That's what Harry coaches. That's what Harry knows. And that's what he was brought here to do in the first place. Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say, I think that one talking point that you always speak about a little bit and just kind of general is the fact of like when Harry Heastand was here, he would always recruit tackles and move them inside the guard and inside the center. That kind of speaks to why you want to run a ton of zone, right? Like you're valuing length and athleticism, which especially for outside zone is so paramount. So, but I do agree. Like you need more than that because you're running the risk of being too I don't know what the word
predictable.
is. Right
I mean, there's certain ways you can attack the zone if you're a good defense. Like most teams won't be able to stop it. Just like in 2017, most teams couldn't stop Notre Dame no matter what they did. But when they played Miami, who had multiple NFL players up front, when they played Georgia, had NFL players, and the backs weren't really doing what they needed to do, the line couldn't just open these gaping holes. Now, the production in those games should have been better if the backs would have been better. The thing about Josh Adams is Josh was always kind of that patient, look for the home run guy. He was not a guy that just, hey, we're going to get you 3 here, and we need you to put your foot in the ground and get 3, not -2. I think that hurt him in those games. But the fact that they didn't really have there wasn't a lot in their wheelhouse they could go to if they took the inside and outside zone away. The buck sweep is a complementary play. The counter is a complementary play that when you're getting those parts going, that you've got something you can go to that like, wow, you can really hurt them. But you have to have those kind of things. You have to have something there. Now, the difference in this offense that I think is going to help too is because you have a more mobile quarterback, it's going to make your zone more diverse because you can go reads. But the other thing too is they've got to enhance their RPO game. If they can enhance their RPO game, that also is going to mean you're going to always have one less defender right in the box. And with a guy like Chris Tyree, that's the difference between a 5-yard run and a 50-yard touchdown. If you can get that backside, if you can go deuces backside and you're running inside zone this way, if you can get that rover or will, depending on how they line up, out of the box, and because you're running a legit RPO system, then that's Chris Tyree cuts that zone back. There's not many linebackers in the country that can be out of the box and catch Chris Tyree on a straight inside zone cutback. There just aren't.
No.
And to me, that's where the RPO game and Tyler Buchner's ability to run are going to make the run game that much better when you add in a guy like Harry Heastan who's going to get them back to being physical and being tough. But I do think zone is going to be the bread and butter of what they do.
Yep.
Blaine Tyler, do you think with our roster this year as is, do you think we will be effective in 11 personnel down the field, or will it almost have to be 12 or 13 or even 21 or 22? Yes, to all of it. I mean, I think they'll be effective in 11 personnel. I mean, because look, we're worried about the numbers of the depth chart, but there's still 7 guys on the roster that to some degree can play. I mean, there are a lot of teams in the country, a lot of teams that would say, yeah, I'll take Deion Colsey, Lorenzo Styles, Avery Davis, Tobias Merriweather, Braden Lindsey, and Joe Wilkins. Yeah, Jaden Thomas. Sign me up for that action. There's about 9 teams on their schedule next year that would die for that group of 5 guys. I mean, you take away USC and maybe Clemson, but I think I'd take Notre Dame's receivers over Clemson's receivers. They're all the same guy with different numbers. And Ohio State's the other one. Ohio State's not trading their receivers for anybody. Okay. Even with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave gone.
They might not trade it for some NFL teams.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. The point being, they can do that. The depth issue means, okay, now you can't run 11 all the time because you only have maybe let's say 5 guys can play. But I think they can absolutely be effective in 11 personnel. I definitely think they can be effective in 11 personnel down the field. And these are the kind of technical questions I love, by the way. We have great fans here, man. Like, they start thinking about how many other fan bases and how many other shows are people diving into the whether or not Notre Dame's 11, 12, 13, or 21 or 22 personnel. I absolutely love it. I'm so fired up right now. But, yes, I think they can be in 11 personnel and be effective and dominant and efficient and explosive in every capacity. Quick game, vertical game, intermediate, mesh stuff, the crossers, getting guys moving. I think they can do it all. Okay. But I also think they need to take advantage of the 12 personnel and 13 personnel, run game wise and pass game wise. Put Kane Barong in the game and go 4 wide, essentially, with him and Michael Mayer. Then the next snap, you come back and Michael Mayer's attached and Kane's going in motion and he's lead blocking on the 9 technique, right? You can do all that. Use George Takis in the pass game in a more traditional 12 personnel. Go 21 with Logan Diggs. And heck, I want to see Notre Dame one time next year. I want to see at least once Tommy Rees comes out and games plan for 30 personnel. If he doesn't do it, I'm going to be mad. And give me Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles outside, or go 31 and put Michael Mayer backside and Lorenzo front side or Lindsey front side. Give me a freaking diamond formation with Chris Tyree in the back and Audric Estime here and Logan Diggs there, and give me that old school Oklahoma State diamond formation. And just go right down the field with it. You know what I mean? Because one snap, you're in 31 personnel in a diamond. The next snap, you've got Chris Tyree in the slot and Logan Diggs in the slot, and you're running read zone with Audric Estime. Okay, and you're throwing bubbles to Logan or Tyree, or you're throwing RPO bombs to Lorenzo Styles. Like, why can't you do that for a series to keep a team off base? Because here's what happens if you have success with it. The whole next series, they're in their whiteboards like, okay, how the heck do we defend that? And then the next series you come out in 12 personnel, run it down their freaking throat, right? That's what I love about the personnel, and that's what I want to see Tommy Rees use that personnel in. I mean, because kids love that, right? Like, you go implement a diamond form, and hey guys, we're just going to use this, and it's going to be fun and all that. And we have like 3 pass plays out of it and 3 run plays out of it, and we're going to have some fun with it. Kids love that stuff.
Recruits will love it too.
Yes, exactly.
Love it.
Like,
I was thinking about Oregon for a second, right? When they were just so like, oh, those uniforms and that option, and used the Anthony Thomas all over the place. Like,
like, did y'all see that they ran like 4 straight plays and then threw a bomb to Styles for him? And it's not your base offense. You can't run that every series because that's easy to figure it out. But like, just do some fun stuff like that. So Blaine, I think they can do a lot of different things, but that's the point. Be multiple, be diverse, because here's the thing, out of all that stuff, 11, 12, 13, 21, 22, 30, 31. Out of all those different things, you can run the same stuff out of all of them. It's just going to look a little different, because if you're running outside zone out of a diamond formation, it's your mechanics as a quarterback. I mean, you're going to need to take a step back and get that ball out, so that way that guy can kind of get going, right? But you're still running outside zone. The line's blocking it the same exact way. Your quarterback mechanics just may have to change a little bit. There's things you can do where you can fake that, and you do that, and then if they collapse, you pull it and throw a swing route to Chris Tyree. I mean, so there's some little wrinkles, but you're still running your inside zone. You're not inventing new run concepts. It doesn't change for your offensive line at all. It doesn't change for your receivers at all. It doesn't change the read for the back at all. It just means his eye levels, he's coming from here instead of here. So it's not as complex as it seems. For a defense, it's like, what? Seriously? Yeah. We spent all week game planning for this, and you guys come out and you throw a 30 personnel diamond formation at us. Right? Come on, give me a break. So I just want to see all of it. I think they could be effective in all of it. It's not about one's better than the other. It's about what are you using from all of them. And I think there's no reason Notre Dame can't be an effective 11, 12, 13, 21, and 22 personnel offense if they use them together and use them correctly. So that's my tangent for the day. Brent Byers, Brian, what is your way too early prediction on how the first game in the shoe is going to play out? Man, I have no clue. I don't do the way too early thing. I don't know who's going to start a quarterback. I don't know who their starting receiver is going to be. I don't know what a Harry Hiestand offensive line is going to look like. They don't even have a defensive coordinator yet. Like, they don't even have a running backs coach yet. Like, I can't possibly have any clue how that's going to look. I think Notre Dame, from a talent standpoint, if they play to their potential and Ohio State plays to their potential, it's going to be a dogfight. There's some areas that concern me. The pass game matchups for Ohio State against Notre Dame concern me. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm saying, okay, but is C.J. Stroud going to have enough time to throw to those receivers? There's things where I look at their secondary, and if I'm Tom Rees, I'm like, I cannot wait to throw against that secondary. You know what I mean? But then I'm like, okay, is my young tackles going to be able to block Zach Harrison and Tyreek Smith next year? I mean, so both teams have things where I like the matchup for them. Both teams, I'm concerned about the matchup for them. If Notre Dame plays to their potential, they can give Ohio State a game, and they can beat Ohio State. If freaking Oregon can beat Ohio State early in the season, if Virginia Tech can beat Ohio State early in the season, the year that they want to flip a national championship, Notre Dame should be able to give them a game and maybe beat them. But am I going to predict them to beat them on January 21st when I don't know who the defensive coordinator is going to be? It's a little too early to have those too early predictions. I want to see the spring. I just want to see how the spring plays out. But at the very least, let me wait until they have a full coaching staff, Brett. So I'll make you this promise. When I know who the coaching staff is going to be, because I'm telling you right now, who they hire as the defensive coordinator, it could change my thought on. There's a couple guys I'm like, they hired that guy. Let me see this. I like this. And there's a couple guys I'm like, I don't know how much I love that. So let me at least see who I don't care about the running backs coach. If you can't coach running backs, you don't deserve to be coaching, period. But let me see who the D coordinator is first. And then I'll at least give you a way too early prediction then. I don't like it, but I've been asked it several times. At least let me see who the coordinator is. Then I'll give you a way too early. As long as everybody knows I have the right to change my mind post-spring, okay? No. So I have the right to change my mind post-spring, and then I'll be able to do it. So let's get a couple more team questions in before we dive into some recruiting, because I do want to get to some recruiting questions here before we get out of here. Laker Irish, if you could poach any coach from any team, salary not a concern, who would you take and for what coaching role.
Wow.
So trying to think of what role. Yeah, I'd take Nick Saban as my corners coach.
Yeah, well,
I'd take Nick Saban as my D coordinator if he's open for the job. You know, he's always wanted to go back. He's a good Catholic boy. So no, in all seriousness, Laker, let me think about that one for a second. Because honestly, if you'd asked me this question 2 months ago, the guy would have said I wanted him to hire is on staff. It's Harry Easton. You know what I mean? But I
just Googled some lists. I'm just trying to honestly, there's so many ways that you could go, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think I'd want to have a great D coordinator and, look, Tommy Rees is the offensive coordinator and all that stuff, but I'm telling you, I would really like to see Harry Easton and Phil Longo coaching together. I started thinking about if that cat can get 2,000-yard rushers at North Carolina with that line, then I'm like, would Harry want to be in an air raid offense? I don't know, So that's just the one that I've always kind of I'm really curious how that one would go. But, obviously since Tom Rees is here, I'm not going to go there. That's a really good question.
I got a name, but it's not. So it's not going to structurally fit how the roster's set up right now. But I just love Jim Leonhard, the defensive coordinator for the Wisconsin Badgers. I think he's an outstanding football
Jim Leonard
mind.
could coach linebackers.
There's no question about it. He could coach
and look, just have a GA that helps you with the linebackers. Now Brian Mason coached the Rovers. He did that at Cincinnati, and then let Jim Leonard just coach the defense. They actually, from what I'm told from a couple sources, they actually reached out to him.
Really?
Yeah. But I think it's the thing is there's obviously his alma mater, but he's got to think that there's a chance he's going to be the head coach there at some point in time, because Paul Chris hasn't exactly lit the world on fire since he came back.
No.
And they've been a little underwhelming outside of the 1 year they won 10 games with Jack Cohn. They've been a little underwhelming. And, look, you get in a situation where if Jim Leonard, if they think they might actually lose him, it might be that time where they say, hey, let's promote him to head coach. But I think that was part of the reason that he said no to Notre Dame. Plus, I don't know if I'm Jim Leonard if I want to coach in Notre Dame because the head coach is a defensive guy. Right. He's going to kind of look, I want to coach the way I want to coach. Yeah, which I completely respect. Respect. Mike Zimmerman, that's a good one, Ryan. I think I'm going to take that one. That's a good Jim Leonard is the decor. Could you imagine what Jim Leonard could do with the Notre Dame talent?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, because
look what he did with Jack Sanborn and Leo Chenell. What's he going to do with Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka and Nolan Ziegler and Prince Colley and Drake Bowen? Are you Keon Keeley? Are you kidding me?
Right.
Unbelievable. Mike Zimmerman, do you think Notre Dame will be more aggressive on offense compared to what BK was with the offense in the past? I hope so. They certainly were in the bowl game.
Yeah.
I would think so, yes. I think they'll be more aggressive. The degree to which they're more aggressive, that we don't know. But, yes, I do believe that they'll be more aggressive. Mm-hmm. Joe Aribe, who do you think has a chance of coming out of nowhere to become a key player on the defense or offense? Coming out of nowhere. So, I mean, it's at Notre Dame that can be hard to do because, my first thought is Deion Colzie. Because he didn't play a whole lot. I caught 4 balls last year, but it's but he was a top 100 recruit. Is that really coming out of nowhere? I don't know if he would be a guy I would go to. George Takis is a guy that you could say maybe has a breakout as the number 2 tight end if they actually start using him, but he's not coming out of nowhere. None of the offensive linemen they're all names. I say, Rocco Spindler is going to have a great year, but he's not coming out of nowhere. So it's hard for me to kind of really do that on offense. I probably have to go. Deion Colzie is going to be my prediction on offense because I think he's going to go from 4 catches to at least 40, for me. And, he'd be my bet on offense. Defensively, I'm going to go Riley Mills. I'm going to ride the Riley Mills train this offseason. And until we get to spring, if he's not ready or they don't move him, if they move him to Big End, I think Riley Mills is my guy. And I think that's kind of coming out of nowhere because he was a top 200 recruit, but not like an elite recruit. And he hasn't played a ton the last 2 years to the point where people know who he is a great deal. And he's going to be my guy. I hope that my story changes by the end of the spring, not because Riley's opinion changed, but some cornerback comes out in the spring and is like, wow, like a Ryan Barnes or something like
Yeah.
that. But I'm going to go Riley Mills. Ryan, what say you on both sides?
Well, you just stole mine. Unfortunately, I was going to
Well,
say
that's what's great about being the boss.
Right.
I get to go first and give those good answers.
Well, I was just going to say the best case scenario for me is that a cornerback takes the second cornerback job from Clarence and really takes a step up. Another guy that I've really liked in just the flashes, I guess I would throw out is Jacob Lacey at defensive tackle. Like, if he takes a big jump, because I know Howard Cross is, they're kind of in a similar molds. I think they're both good football players, but there's some reps, man, where Jacob Lacey, his quickness just takes you off guard. You're like, wow, he's got a little more penetration ability than you might.
People have kind of forgotten about him, Ryan, because he got hurt in 2020. He didn't play a ton this year. He had a huge fourth down stop against Wisconsin. Yeah. But that's a good one. That's a good one. I could see that one too. I wrote about him being a guy that if he breaks out, could have a huge impact on the defense. If they can get a nose that can be a penetrating, because I think he could be tell me if you disagree with this. You're allowed to do that.
Yep.
I think if Jacob Lacey plays to his potential this year and can do it for 300 snaps, he's a better player. He's a more effective player than Kurt Hinish was.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that one. Like I said, the flashes that you saw from Lacey, I'm like, I didn't like. I mean, I knew who 54 was, but like a couple of the stops, I'm just like, all right, man, like that's a little more juice than I was anticipating. I mean, Kurt was a really solid, physical, tough football player, good Notre Dame football player. But I don't think it's like a stretch, or it's definitely not a hot take to say that Jacob Lacey is a much more physically gifted player than Kurt Hinish. So if we're hitting potential, I think that he's got a lot of penetration ability. Honestly,
yeah.
Howard Cross too, though. I think Howard Cross is a good player too.
But I think Howard Cross needs to be a lower volume guy. Vince, before you pull that up, I just got a DM from one of our regulars. He doesn't post as much in the chat, but he does listen a lot. And he is asking for Irish Breakdown Nation to keep his family in his prayers. His grandfather's about to pass away, so it sounds like they're with him now. And he had asked that we keep him and his family in our prayers. So Jacob, absolutely, buddy. You're in our prayers, you and your family and your grandfather. Said that his grandfather is a Notre Dame and an Auburn fan, but more so, I'm going to go with this one. I think more so Notre Dame. So we will definitely pray for your grandfather and for you. And man, you got my DM. So let me know if there's anything you need. So really appreciate you reaching out and letting us know what's going on with you and your family. So we will definitely, buddy, keep you in our prayers for sure. So and just be with your family and let us know what you need. Corey D, super chat. Thank you, buddy. Prediction. Give me a couple of names you think will start opposite Cam Hart in 2022. So obviously Clarence Lewis is going to be an option. So that's a name.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
First two names that pop in your head, Ryan, as far as guys that could battle for the job. I got two that definitely pop into mind.
Ryan Barnes was the first guy for me.
Okay.
I think he's a very talented football player, obviously. So I hope that he does make a push there.
Mm-hmm.
Other guy, I'm going to go with, I'll go Philip Riley. I mean, he's got physicality to him. There's some good things to like. Ryan Barnes would definitely be my guy that I'm like, if I'm hopeful, just for the length aspect and the talent aspect, I would rather him take the job. I mean, Philip Riley is a talented player in his own right. He's just a little shorter, a little more of a physical guy, but I think Barnes is just a little more God-given ability. So I would hope he take that path.
I pray that Philip Riley has such a good offseason that they have no choice but to put him in the slot and ride that three-corner defense. Because he can tackle, he can almost be kind of like a rover. I mean, you put him in the slot when you're playing a team like Ohio State or a team like North Carolina that's going to throw the ball a lot, but also still be a team you have to play and respect their run game. I think Philip Riley could be that kind of guy. Jaden Mickey's another guy I like for that. Ryan Barnes obviously is one for me. The other one for me, and I'm just going to stick with this because I'm gonna stick with my evaluation and until I'm proven wrong. But I think Benjamin Morrison is one of those rare type of corners at a place like Notre Dame that could come in and play as a freshman. Now, I don't know if they're going to give him a chance to play as a freshman. And I know he's not an early enrollee, but, there was a time in college football where guys actually weren't early enrollees and still played as freshmen. That actually happens. But I just think he's got a chance to be a really special player. And he's so physically advanced. He's 6 foot. He's 185, 190 already. He's a strong physical kid, and he can flat out run. So he's my dark horse. Ryan Barnes is that's the guy I'm hoping and predicting, steps up and takes over that job, whether it's as a boundary guy or whether they move Cam back to the boundary and Ryan plays field. I don't really care. And when you have 2 6'3" corners, you can just play left, right for all I care. I mean, I'd get to that. I'm cool with that because there's enough of those type of offenses on your schedule this year with North Carolina and Clemson and Ohio State where you're going to want to kind of have to be left, right at times. So just roll with that.
Yeah.
The other one is Morrison. I think he, to me, has the most God-given talent of anyone that they're going to have on their roster next year corner. Just things that you can't teach. Now, the question is how quickly we pick up the teachable things, because that's going to be a key of whether or not he's going to play next year. But that's a good question. Super chat from Brian from Fat Fish. We haven't seen you in a while, Fat Fish. Glad to have you with us. Brian, in your opinion, what are acceptable times for a man to cry? I think there's only 5 or so, one being, of course, the end of Rudy. Yeah, that's a good one. I think I have not had the pleasure, and it's probably the one thing that, my life's turned out pretty good. The one that didn't turn out the way I'd hoped is being a dad. And Ryan and Vince, you guys can attest to this. I think, the birth of your child, I'm assuming, is a time where it's okay to cry. The loss of a loved one is an okay time to cry. I'm not going to lie to you. When the Broncos won a Super Bowl in 1997, I freaking cried, tears of joy. And look, I'm not one of those people that look, when's an acceptable time for a man to cry? Whenever the freaking heck you want to. I'm not one of those, I don't think crying shows a lack of masculinity. Vince just texted me when the Cubs win the World Series. I cried when my dog passed away, lost a loved one, and because my dogs aren't like my kids, because I haven't been blessed with children of my own, unfortunately. Look, anytime you feel moved to cry, to me, I think I'm a big believer that I believe in masculinity. I believe in being a man. I believe that men should be, should be leaders and things like that. Not that women can't be, but I think as a man, that's something that I feel, you should be called to do. But I don't think that being a man means you can't have emotions. I think being a man means you don't allow those emotions to just drag you around everywhere and you're just constantly making bad decisions because you're emotional. But having emotion, being man enough to say, I feel this way and I'm going to show it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. My dad wasn't really I think I only saw my dad cry twice in my life, but it wasn't that he hated it. I think the first time I remember my dad crying was his own father's funeral. My dad's a big guy. He's like 6'3", he's a big guy. Vince, you've met my dad. He not a small man. And he was always a strong rock for me. And I remember just feeling seeing that vulnerability. I didn't think less of my dad when I saw him cry. I felt like, wow, my dad feels like it's a good thing. So I cry anytime you want to. Look, I'll cry at times in movies. My wife and I are watching a series called The Chosen. It's a really good movie, a series. I think they're in season 3, but we're in season 2. But it's basically about the life of Jesus Christ. And there's just things that happen where I felt that moment of conversion and things like that, where it's I get emotional and I choke up a little bit. I don't think that makes me less of a man. Now I also don't think you should just walk around crying all the time and everything. You know what I mean? Nobody should be that way. You got some emotional problems because you cry about everything. But no, I think there's plenty of acceptable times for cry. Anytime you have a feeling of emotion, a strong feeling of emotion, whether it's times of joy or times of loss, man, let her rip. Just, I think there's a way to go about doing it, don't make me have to come hold you, Vince. I don't want to have to come over there and hold you. But no, man, I'm not one of those, you're a man, don't cry. Well, forget that. You know what I mean? That's how you feel. It's a passionate crying comes from a place of passion, whether it's sadness and I'm all for passion, man. So I don't know, Ryan, do you have a different take? You think it's girly to cry, or are you one of those guys?
No, I'm not. Loss is obviously the number one that came to mind. You mentioned birth of my daughter was definitely one where you're going to shed a tear. It's just going to happen. It's the craziest moment I've ever experienced. I think that getting married was one where I'm not hysterically crying because I'm happy, but you shed a tear seeing your wife walk down the aisle. And then movies. The only movie I've ever cried during that I can remember was when G-Baby died in Hardball. that was a incredibly
Never,
sad.
is that the one with Keanu Reeves?
Yes,
I never saw that. Yeah.
First time I saw it, I think I was like 13 or 14, and when he passed away, and I'm sorry if I just spoiled that. If anybody's never seen Harbaugh, it's so
like, crap,
sad,
I have it on my weekend to-do list after all these years.
I probably could watch that now in the same scene with getting that. It's so sad. It's such a sad.
I cry like tears of joy in patriotic moments. So like Miracle, at the end of Miracle when they beat the Russians, yeah. Yep, I had some tears. Not gonna lie to you, I had some tears. But yeah. Yes.
You took another one. You said when the Broncos won. When I think I was 9 when I'm a Rams fan. When the Rams beat the Titans in the Super Bowl, I 100% cried because I was only 9 years old at that point.
When John Elway retired and he started to cry, like I was fine. I was like sophomore in college when he retired. And I'm like, I'm sad because like he's who I modeled I fell in love with the Broncos when I was 5 years old and he was a rookie. That's story my dad tells. I don't remember it, but I always remember being a Bronco fan. And I wore number 7. I was a big John Elway fan. And he was doing his retirement. I knew he was going to retire. He just won back-to-back Super Bowls. It was time. But when he started to cry and he's like, I just can't do it physically anymore. I was like, oh my God, John. So I'm not gonna lie to you.
When Kurt Warner left the Rams too. Oh my God, I was a blubbering mess.
The last time I cried was like 2 days ago. Dead serious. Yeah. Here's one of those. You want to get me to cry? Those videos when service members come home and their kids see them for the first time. Like that emotion, because that to me, it's the combination of just the emotion, but for me also sort of a sadness because I don't get to experience that. I don't get experience coming home and having your kid like daddy's home, like that kind of thing. But those are really cool because of, my love for the military and having so many members in the military. I know that longing, that missing that they have for their parents. And I know that joy. And when you see that, like there's this little kid's laying in bed and his dad comes home and his dad's trying to wake him up, but the kid won't wake up. And he finally wakes up and he sees his dad and he just starts screaming and crying. Like, man, that's those get me those get me every time, man. When I see those Vince down there crying, I already look at him down there crying. Those get me every time. Cause again, it's a joy. Like, man, just to have that kind of love for somebody that you just feel that way is just like that's one of those cool ones. So Fat Fish, P.S. My new Fats Times is out now. Born and raised an Irish fan. Video shot in the Riverside neighborhood. Love the IB family. Brian's the GOAT. Thank you, sir. So yeah, you took us off course a little bit talking about like crying and stuff like that. So we got off the football for a little bit, but we love. We had Ryan, you missed the show this summer. We talked for like an hour and a half about military movies and military history during one of our mailbags. So we say people talk about whatever you want, right? Love it. So we had some fun doing that one. AST 12321 with Super Chat. How does Notre Dame's timeline for needing a quarterback play with Dante Moore's timeline for deciding? Do they work together at the moment, or will the Irish have to bail?
Well, I think everybody's freaking out a little bit, right? Because someone put a future cast in for Arnold,
Jackson Arnold
to go to Oklahoma was kind of something where I saw on the message board people flipping out. I do think that, Brian, you brought up a great point and if you're not on the message board, I don't know what you're actually doing with your life, but if you, I think Brian said something like, I think that there might be his lair, maybe even where it's like Jackson Arnold's trying to make you, he's playing chicken a little bit. Like he wants you to make a decision. You know what I mean?
I've been told he wants Notre Dame. That's what I've been told. But he's not going to wait around forever for Notre Dame. So, hey, right. Oklahoma's a good option. So I'm going to play a little game of chicken with Notre Dame. But a good bluff really works best when you actually have, the ability to play that hand, right? So, hey, fine, you don't want me. I'm going to go to Oklahoma. But I'm going to use this to kind of say, hey, guys, if you really want me, you got to figure it out now.
Right.
And so, but to me, the flip side, if I'm Notre Dame, is I like Jackson Arnold. He's a good football player. I'd take him in this class, but he's not good enough to where I'm going to get off my Dante Moore plan.
Stop.
In my opinion.
Right.
Because there's other guys, there's Chris Vizina, there's other quarterbacks you can go to. Now, the risk you run is that you can hang on to the Dante Moore thing too long, miss him, and by that time, Jackson Arnold's gone, Chris Vizina's gone, Avery Davis is gone, And there really is, now you're getting another Steve Angeli. That's a legitimate concern. But that's where you got to say, don't miss on Dante Moore, right? Like, get Dante Moore. Don't, stop. You're Notre Dame, right? I mean, you're freaking Notre Dame. You shouldn't be getting Angelis and Brendan Clarks and guys like that all the time. You should be recruiting elite quarterbacks. Right. And so if that's that to me is my biggest question mark about Tommy Rees more than anything else, is his ability to recruit. And that's where you're gonna have to be. So good one. Jay Towers, can you even have too much depth at quarterback with the portal in play now? Seems like the number 2 guy always leaves and you end up starting the season with QB1 and QB3. I don't think he's always leaves. There's a lot of kids that don't leave. It's just we focus on the kids that leave more than anything else. And so, look, yes, you can have too much depth, only have 5 scholarships. So, yeah, you can have too many guys on quarterback scholarships because then you don't have enough scholarships for receivers or running backs or corners or linebackers or somewhere, right? So, and also, here's the other thing. You only have X number of reps that you can go to each week. This is the thing. I don't think some people really understand this, right? You only have a certain number of time. You can only practice for so long each week. Within that practice, you can't just run team all day, so that way you make sure all 5 of your quarterbacks are getting reps, right? You only have a certain number of reps, and you only have a certain number of teaching moments where you can teach guys. And the more guys that you have competing for a job, the more reps have to get divvied out, which takes away from those type of things. So, to me, that's kind of where I'm at is, yes, you can have too many quarterbacks. At some point in time, you got to be able to narrow it down. And again, I don't think that Drew Pine is going anywhere right now. I don't see Drew Pine leaving until he's got a degree from Notre Dame. He's not going to have a degree from Notre Dame until after the 2022 season. So that's kind of where I'm at. So, Ryan, by the way, I do like your background. It reminds me of when we first got started here, and I kind of, had the little SI flag, but you got a much, much better one. Yeah, there you go. Like the IB Nation flag, Ryan. Yes.
My wife said I need to get another one so we can hang it outside. So I might be in there.
I can do that. We'll hook you up, man. You don't have Vince knows, man. You don't have to buy IB stuff, man. When you work for me, that's kind of one of the perks, right? So, John Zabrowski, I feel we're going to have an Irish Breakdown television network by next year if we all keep watching. This is the Irish Breakdown television network. The difference is this is free. You don't have to pay. We're going to keep it on YouTube to make sure you guys keep it for free.
And everybody streams now. Everyone streams now. I popped it yesterday while I was writing. I just put it on the smart TV.
Yeah,
streamed it. So.
And I do want to kind of change things and do different things and mix things up. But yeah, we're always looking to expand. We're always looking to grow and make things better and all that kind of stuff. But yes, this is Irish Breakdown Television Network. No question about it. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Thank you for the super chat. Ryan, Mel Kiper Jr. Roberts. Keep up the good work. IB, you guys rock. IB fam, great information on the boards. Sign up. Yes, and he is Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Also used to be Real Sports Time Alex, right? Isn't that his previous name, Vince, I think is what it was. He did sign up this week for the message board. Ryan, what you have to understand is I know that drives you nuts, but the people that I know that say that about you, they mean it as a compliment because they do have a lot of respect for Mel Kiper.
Yeah. I know,
so,
and I
may not because you're a draft guy, but fans.
Well, no, I have respect for Mel because he is a pioneer in the business. I just there's multiple ways to kind of look at Mel Kiper, though, from different scopes.
Just your voice, you sound like Mel.
That's fair. He's got a good voice, so
he's an East Coast guy. He's from Baltimore. You're from Jersey. There's not a big difference there.
That's not going to happen, Johnny. Sorry, that's absolutely not going to happen. My dad's got kind of the Mel Kiper thing happening. That's not.
You don't have the hair your dad has. I met your dad at that football game this year. You don't have that kind of hair. Yeah, you.
Because it's too much to tame, man. Like my thing grows out, and then it's just like too much to handle. I'm just like, nah, I'm just going to keep it short.
No, plus Ryan's a hat guy like me, and it just would be silly to take the time to grow your hair out when you're just going to put a hat on it anyway.
Absolutely.
So, yes, the Mel Kiper, because that's the first thing I said when I had you on the show. I told Vince, I was like, dude, we had a draft guy on there. He sound just like Mel Kiper. So it was meant as a compliment because Mel is to the draft world what Tom Lemming is to the recruiting world. He is the godfather of that. You know what I mean?
For sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I always have a lot of respect for him. So here we go. Ryan Dreads Roberts. No. All right, Vince. Yeah. Oh, Grim, every team needs a number 3 quarterback. Who is possible at Notre Dame? That's a good question, Grim, and thank you for the super chat. But that's why I said I hope that they go find some Ivy League kid or some kid that's cool being a backup. But there's just not a lot of guys like that. I mean, the Hunter Johnsons are rare. They're just most kids are looking to play, and like the kid from Dartmouth. Be an ideal guy, played some at Dartmouth, didn't put up big numbers. He's not an NFL guy. He's like 6 foot, $190. I don't know if he's picked a school or not yet, but that's a guy that I'd go for. He'd be a nice number 2, number 3 quarterback if somebody goes down. But a guy like that's not leaving Dartmouth to go be the 3rd string quarterback in Notre Dame, most likely, Yeah. And those guys are just hard to find. And so
it's in jelly by default then, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so there you go. Sam Tyrell, Brian, finish the sentence. Notre Dame makes it to the 2000 National Championship game if Tyler Buchner is everything that I think he can be.
Fair.
I mean, that's it. Anybody have anything different? I mean, Vince, you're down there. Would you say anything other than that? I mean, look, that's the thing is Tyler Buchner, if he's as good as I think he can be, is a game changer. Notre Dame hasn't had a game changer quarterback in a while. And they've never had one that has like some of the other ones had like Deshaun Kaiser could run. He wasn't a runner.
No.
Right? Like he wasn't to me, he wasn't what Tyler Buchner is.
He's like Sam Howell. He's like a physical runner. He's not a gifted runner,
Right. And that's a good comparison. Different body types, but like as far as how they play, yes, very good comparison. I think that he's got a chance to be a guy where he just like here. I'm trying. Who was I talking about this the other day? It might have been Vince. But I said, the reason I'm so excited about Tyler Buchner is he's every bit as dynamic as a runner as Brandon Wimbush, if not more so. Yeah. But already he's a better passer than Brandon was in 2017. Already. And so it's like, think about that. Like right now, to me, he's a better player than Brandon Wimbush was in 2017. He's just not as strong because he's as a freshman. Well, by next year, that won't be the case. And so that's how I see him. He's a Brandon Wimbush who can make more throws. The thing is, if he's the player that I think he can be, he is more of a passer that can also be a dynamic runner. And those guys are rare. Like a better version of Sam Howell in that case, because he's Sam Howell that you can build a run game around, but he can sit in the pocket and beat you. Now, he doesn't have Sam's downfield arm strength. That's an area where Sam's, in my opinion, you may disagree, Ryan, he's one of the best deep ball throwers in college football. I mean, he throws a beautiful deep ball. Tyler's got to prove he can do that. So he doesn't have that right now. But he could, like in theory, be that Sam Howell, but better type of skill, in my opinion. And so if he becomes that guy in 2022, I think Notre Dame has a chance to win the championship. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't think he's going to be there yet. I don't think he's going to be there till 2023. But if they win the title next year, it's going to be because of that. Panic Mob. The super chat. Thank you, sir. If Notre Dame needs help at wide receiver, why wouldn't move JoJo Johnson receiver where he played in high school at Maryville High School? Don't disagree at all. And matter of fact, Panic, I think this is a great point. I wrote an article about this at Irish Breakdown on Wednesday. And I also talked about how Jacob Lacey could be a breakout. It was my midweek musings, but I also talked in there about I don't think they need to go to the portal or high school route to fill the receiver void. Not only JoJo, but Xavier Watts. And the reason I don't push the JoJo angle as much right now, Panic Mob, is because JoJo's coming off a torn ACL. And so it happened during the season. So I don't know how far along he's going to be. Is he going to be back to full strength? Can he go in the spring? Those kind of things that could keep him maybe from having the impact in 2022 that he could have if he was healthy. Because if JoJo is healthy and he could just go through the full spring, then I think he could help you. I think Xavier Watts, though, could step in and be a playmaker. That's why I went with Xavier Watts. But no, I mean, you move JoJo and Xavier right now, one corner, one safety. Those depth charts are still fine because of Brandon Joseph now being on campus. They're not going to be hurting a corner because they took JoJo, right? And they're not going to be hurting a safety because they took Xavier because of you're both fifth years are coming back. You've got Ramon there. You've got Brandon coming in. I think Xavier could be a playmaker on offense. I think of a 2000 because I'm also projecting forward, right? And I'm projecting forward to 2023. And you've got Dion going to his junior year, Lorenzo going to his junior year. You've got Tobias Merriweather going to sophomore year. Maybe you have a great freshman class coming in, but then you have Xavier also there. You've got Lorenzo, Xavier, Dion, Tobias, the incoming freshman. Holy moly, that could be dynamic. And so I'm with you. I don't think they need to go to the grad transfer route to do that. I don't. I think just that you got two kids on defense that, because what I'm not a fan of moving kids from one position to another just to be a depth guy. I don't believe in that. If you're going to move a guy, you move him to give him a chance to play, not just give you a number. That's not fair to that kid, right? That's why I think Xavier's the first, because I don't think JoJo's ready to be that guy yet. I may move JoJo and, because that's going to be his future if he's on board with it. But, you may not play a ton this year. I'd have that conversation, but Xavier's the first one to move because I think Xavier can help you now. Irish for Life question, transfer portal has been a disaster the way it has been done. What do you think, Brian? How would you fix it? So I should write an article about this. I think there's some things that they need. I think they need to just blow up the whole system, right, and implement this plan, okay? And it begins when you sign your letter of intent. Everything that a school promises you, they have to be willing to put on paper. If they promise you jersey number 3, playing time, starting job, 20 grand, whatever the case may be, living in a certain dorm, whatever they promise you, they need to put in your NIL or your NLI, your national letter of intent. And if they break that promise that first year, you get an automatic waiver. If they say you're going to start and they don't start you, then you can get out of your scholarship right away. And the reason I say that is don't promise something you can't guarantee a kid. Don't lie to a kid knowing he's not going to start as a freshman because it's going to convince him there, right? So I think number one, that's what I would do is if you make a contractual obligation and you don't live up to your end as the institution, then after the season, I get an automatic free waiver. Okay. I think there needs to be a legitimate spelled out process for kids to ask to get a transfer that is legitimate. If I can prove documentation that my mom has cancer, then I should be able to go closer to home, something like that. Right. But make it clear what those processes are. Outside of that, those two things, breaking a promise or whatever else, the only other time that the other change I would make is if a coordinator or head coach leaves, there's a 30-day window from when the new coach is hired that so from the moment the coach leaves, there's a 30-day window that you can't transfer at that position. Okay. Because that gives the school time to hire the new coach and allow that new coach to make his pitch to you without all of the changes, right? And I'll explain kind of how this works otherwise in a second. And then after that coach, you have that 30-day window, or if that coach says, hey, you don't really fit what we do, then the school can release you. Then you can jump in a portal, okay? And so after that 30-day window, there's another 30-day window from a coach leaving that you then have where everybody at that, on that side of the ball or at that position, can leave. And if it's a head coach, then after you hire the new head coach, there's a 30-day you can't leave window, followed by a 30-day window where you don't even have to be in the portal. You know what I mean? Like, you choose, hey, I'm going to pursue other options. Okay. Outside of that, I think the portal needs to be a very narrow window. Okay. Where you don't jump in the portal in the middle of the season. Okay. You don't jump in the portal like just anytime you want. There's a window of, 30 days, 60 days after the season, before semester start, because you can jump in the portal before bowl games. I mean, that's just it. You have to give them the ability to look at places in December. And I know it messes up bowl games, but we've already established that bowl games don't matter, right? So I would create a portal opportunity there. However, just normal transfers for not some special circumstance, you have to sit out a year. You have to sit out a year if you're going to transfer, okay? However, the change that I would make with that is you don't lose that year of eligibility. So if you redshirt as a freshman and then you transfer and you sit out that year, you are still a redshirt freshman when your eligibility comes back up. You don't lose that year. Now you could say, okay, we're going to tie it to graduation. You get that year back if you graduate, and I'd be fine with that. But let's be honest, the NCAA doesn't really give a crap about graduation beyond just little silly things they do to make it seem like they care. They don't care. But if you wanted to tie it to that, that's fine. But I think you should make them transfer, sit out a year, okay? Because there's a lot of advantages that these idiots in the media don't think about. Number one, you get a year of adaptation to your new school. Academically, athletically, you're in the system. You learn a year. And the way that I would do it is you don't usually lose a year of eligibility. So that year of learning, all those type of things, that's a positive for you. Unless there's a proven grievance that you can play right away, okay? I would keep the graduation transfer the way that it is. You graduate, you do the work to graduate. You can transfer and play wherever you want, okay? But the thing that I think about the transfer thing is one of the other positives to having you have to sit out a year is it takes away a lot of the emotional aspects of decisions to transfer. And having been there, and I've coached at levels where you have to sit out a year and levels you don't have to sit out a year. And what tends to happen is we're seeing now is guys just emotionally decided to jump them. This coach isn't mean to me. Like, coaches can't be hard on kids because they're afraid they're going to jump in the portal. It's absurd because you're not doing right. Football is a physical, challenging, emotionally draining, emotional, tough game. And now it's like you got coaches that are afraid to really get on a kid because he's just going to transfer. It shouldn't be that way. That's not good for the coaches, and it's definitely not good for the players. And so if kids have to sit out a year, they're going to take the emotion out of it a lot of times. You also prevent some of the poaching because, for example, Alabama is going to have to project 2 years down the road to their roster, not just right now. So, like when Jahmyr Gibbs entered the portal, I made a phone call almost immediately to some sources down at Georgia Tech and said, hey, is this kid open? Because I knew of some coaches that wanted to look at him. And they said, no, this has been a done deal to Bama for months. He just entered the portal. It's been a done deal for Alabama for months. Because they could just look at their rosters, hey, that's what we need. We're going to go get that guy and that guy and that guy. Right? Well, you take some of that out of it when you have to have them sit out a year because you have to be able to look 2 years in advance. And a kid like Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be less likely to just bail to the highest bidder or the big-time program if he has to sit out a year. Because what you're not going to see is a sophomore superstar transferring. It's not going to do it. So I'm going to stay at the school I'm at, play another year, and go pro, as opposed to transferring to Alabama and doing that. Because what it's done is exactly what I said it was going to be. Schools like Ohio State and Alabama, basically the teams in the bottom half of their leagues become feeder systems for the top schools. So if Alabama wants your stud running back and you're Kentucky or Georgia Tech or Vanderbilt, guess what? You coach that kid up for a year or two, and you're not going to get a benefit from his best years because he's going to go to Bama or Ohio State or LSU or Georgia, something like that. So those are some of the changes I would make to where kids have the ability to leave. If your coach leaves, there's windows for you. There's structured windows for you to leave. If you're lied to by a coach, you have a recourse, because if the coach isn't willing to put his promise on paper, then he didn't really promise it to you, right? And they can't promise seven defensive back starting jobs because they don't have enough open jobs, right? You get what I'm saying? So if there's some protections for the players, because that's what the previous system had. There's no protection for the players. You could say whatever you want, coaches could just leave willy-nilly, no consequences, and players had to, I got to play for a year under this guy who I didn't sign up to play for. I don't think that's right. I think that new hire should get a 30-day window to convince the players that this is why you should stay. And if they don't buy it, then you open the window up and you let them go, right? And so those are the things that I kind of get into, kind of where I'm at on that one. So I am going to write on that to spell all of it out. I think I am going to do that article this offseason. I think I'm finally giving in on it. Andrew Galvin, do we have competition for our target DCs? How does our DC opening compare nationally to other openings at top programs? Thanks. I couldn't tell you about the latter part because I just don't pay enough attention to it, to other teams. I do know that Doug Belk is being pursued. Doug Belk is one of the candidates at Notre Dame. He is being pursued by other schools. That's the only one that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean it's the only one. It's just the only one that I'm aware of. But thank you for the super chat, Andrew. But I think the competition is just those guys staying at the schools that they're at because they're in pretty decent situations right now. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. We got Vince. Let's get about 3 or 4 more team ones, and then we'll dive into some of the recruiting questions we have. So let's get down to some of those, and then we'll get out of here. You run out of are there any more team questions? You're just trying to find some? So did we kind of get to them all? Let's see here. Revolver 6238. Excuse me. How can Notre Dame build a team like Alabama? They don't need to build a team like Alabama. That was Brian Kelly's biggest problem. Trying to chase Alabama. Don't chase Alabama. Make Notre Dame be the best team that you can be. Lou Holtz did not try to be like Miami. He tried to make Notre Dame the best team he could be. That was actually a counter to Miami, because you're never going to be as good as Alabama at what Alabama does, right? And that's not necessarily what you're saying. I think what you're saying is more championship. What Notre Dame has to do is they have to say, what can we be great at? And not every school can be great at the same things, because some schools can recruit certain things better than other schools, right? So what Notre Dame has to do is, what can we be great at? And then what can we do that can provide a bit of a sort of a kryptonite to that other team. So like when you look at Notre Dame and Miami from the 1980s and the 1990 season, I've mentioned this before. Miami won in 5-year stretch, won 3 titles. The 2 years they didn't win a title were years they lost to Notre Dame, right? And the reason that Notre Dame had success against Miami is because Notre Dame was athletic enough that Miami just couldn't out-athlete them. The reason Notre Dame was able to win those games because Notre Dame was one of the few teams in the country that could beat Miami in the trenches. Okay, and that was different. And so with Notre Dame, you have to be a great team in the trenches, but you've got to say, what can we be great at? What do we believe in as a football staff? And then recruit the best you can to that and build yourself up. Because it's like Clemson. Clemson did not try to be like Alabama. Clemson said, this is what we believe in, and we're going to build ourselves this way. And honestly, like, I know it worked out this year for them, but let's be honest. The only reason Georgia beat Alabama this year is because Alabama didn't have John Mechie, Jameson Williams, or Josh Jobe. And Georgia still struggled to beat them. If Alabama's even remotely healthy, they lose that game. And the problem for Georgia, and the reason they always lose to Bama, is because they're trying to be Bama. You're never going to be Bama when Nick Saban is still there. You're always going to be Bama light. And that's why if they're next year when they play each other, if they're healthy again, Alabama's going to curb stomp Georgia because they're going to be pissed off. And you can't count on 3 of their 4 best players not playing in that game, right? Which is exactly why Georgia won. I mean, people can disagree with me all you want, but that's just, Georgia still had to hang on to beat Bama without their 2 best offensive players being in the game. And
when Jameson Williams got hurt. Yeah, when Jameson Williams got hurt, I was like, oh, that's tough now.
Yeah.
Now you just got a bunch of freshmen. That was kind of like that was the turning point in that game, even though that was kind of early. It was because it was Alabama was moving the ball, and Georgia could not stop Jameson Williams. I think he had like 4 catches for 70 yards before he got
in
hurt
like a quarter and a half.
Yeah, it was nuts. So I agree.
And that opened up some running game opportunities too.
Yeah.
And once he went out, it was like, well, we're just going to stop the run and make them beat us with these freshman receivers, because they're not going to beat us with those guys. They're not going to beat us with Slade Bolden. Are you kidding me?
Hey, he just early declared for the draft. So I don't know what you're talking about with Slade.
Yeah. Okay, guy. That's my response to Slade.
That was
fun with that.
That was the weirdest declaration so far. I was like, Slade Bolden declared early. Why?
Somebody cares about this? That's more of a, hey, Slade, we're not gonna bring you back for a 5th year. We'll give you the ability to declare, but you ain't playing for us. You're not going to be starting for us next year. Yeah. So just maximize what you are as a program, and then recruit the best, fastest guys that fit who you are. And that's really the key. But if Notre Dame's going to emulate a team, they need to emulate Clemson, not Alabama, because Clemson didn't always have. Well, they had one top 3 class in the last 10 years under Dabo. One. They've had like 7, 10. The year with Trevor Lawrence, they didn't even finish in the top 10. But get great. Find yourself a great quarterback and someone who can develop quarterbacks. And then build around who you are, which means you got to dominate in the trenches. If Notre Dame's not dominating the trenches, they're not going to be a great team. And then at least be athletic enough at other spots that you can compete with those teams athletically, and then beat them at those areas. And that's It's kind of what's made Alabama so good, is because they built themselves on being great in the trenches. And that's what that's where, to me, long-term sustainability comes from. Because you're not always going to have a receiving core of Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle. That's not going to happen a whole lot. But what you can always make sure of at a place like Notre Dame is you're always great in the trenches. And you should always be great in the trenches. Alan Watson, can college teams have joint practices prior to the season? What I am thinking is a late summer scrimmage practice like the Northwestern IU to get some game speed looks. Unfortunately, you cannot at the D1 level, which I think is absolutely stupid. I think it's absolutely dumb that they don't allow, like, literally every other level of football has that. I think 1AA can scrimmage too. I know we did, and we scrimmaged at D3 all the time. We'd always have a scrimmage. The problem is that, it's the whole, they view it as a game, and they already play too many games. But no, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to have, like, what I think they should do it is not like a scrimmage. And that's what I like that Alan said. Alan didn't say scrimmage. Alan said joint practice. So I have a feeling he's thinking of like the NFL, where they'll have like those little 3-day joint practices. I just say my only concern of that would be is what we've seen with a lot of those practices just turn into brawls, because you got these teams that are going against each other. But if there's ways to do that, I think they should be allowed to do some of those things. It's just there's cost involved for the team. What you'd most likely have is they would end up meeting somewhere, like a 3-day at some, like, Culver Academy where Indiana and Notre Dame both are there, or something like that. And there's cost involved. And these institutions making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars don't like spending money on their players all the time. So, I can't buy the president a new $500,000 desk if I got to send you guys to Culver for an extra 4 days so you can have a joint practice with Northwestern. So that's my little rant. But yeah, I think it's silly that you can't do things like that. I mean, if D3 teams can do it, but D1 teams can't, okay, sure, guy, whatever you say. Revolver 6238 is backing in with another question. Since we are losing so many transfers now due to the rules, will Notre Dame allow a few more non-grad transfers now? With all due respect, I don't think any of the transfers that Notre Dame lost were guys that they weren't expecting to lose or didn't kind of say, you might be better off somewhere else. KJ Wallace left because he was going to be at least, at best, the sixth safety on the roster.
That's crazy.
Kerry G left because he was buried on the depth chart. I mean, it's not like they're losing anyone that's going to start or be in the 2 deep. So I don't think that's really, I mean, the only guy that you could say they lost like that was Ovie Agofu last year. That's the only guy that they lost. But even he would have been just a rotation guy. He wouldn't have been a starter. He would have been behind Isaiah Foskey. So I now, having said that, Notre Dame needs to change the way they handle undergrad transfers. It's a mess right now. Basically, the deans of the different departments set these really insane standards for what they'll accept as transfer credit. And they're absurd. Like, I was told this by a really good source of mine. The baseball team could not get an undergrad transfer in from Harvard because they wouldn't accept his credits.
It's crazy.
That's just stupid. That's just stupid. But now I am told that Notre Dame is working with this, like Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame are working together to try to figure out a fix to make it to where they can get some undergrads, but it's not going to be this year. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen down the road, because it's not as simple as the admissions department saying, yeah, we'll take you. Can, because you've got to be able to transfer a certain number of credits. And if the department heads aren't going to take those credits, then the kid won't be eligible to play or won't be on pace to graduate. And you're not helping a kid by bringing him in just to play football if you know he can't graduate in time because all his credits are just gen eds. And you're not accepting any of his credits for whatever department he's going to get into. You're not helping that kid at all. And that's not how Notre Dame should run their business. So that's my 2 cents on that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, stop focusing on undergrad transfers. It's almost impossible right now. Brandon Joseph, they had to kind of really work hard to get him in, and he came from Northwestern.
And he was a graduate, right?
No.
He graduate? Oh, no, he was not graduate.
I thought he was at first, but no, he is not a grad. Had he stayed at Northwestern during the spring, he would have graduated.
So one more semester. Got
it. Yep. He was close. All right, Vince, we got any more of those? Dante Moore, and Dante Moore. What is going on with his recruitment. Ryan, you want to take a shot at that one? Are you kind of – there's really not a lot new other than what Tommy Rees went and saw him the other day?
Yeah. I mean, other than kind of the coaches making their rounds on the recruiting trails, there's nothing new really to update. I think it's a little bit of a long game with a guy like Dante. And I mean, if I'm in Dante's position, he's taking his time and he's doing his due diligence and really finding what I think is the best fit. So nothing new to report. It's going to be a little bit of a long game with a guy like Dante Moore, which, we've already discussed a little bit in the podcast. If it's worth it or not, I think it is, because he's obviously an incredible talent. So we will keep you guys updated. Obviously, again, on the message board, especially if you want to just stick along with it. It's I think it's still in a solid place, but it's not going to be anything that's going to be understood anytime soon.
Coleman Smith, are we going after any 2022 receivers? None that I think are really options right now. They're going after Justice Lowe. They couldn't get him into school. And because so a lot of these states that went a long time of not having kids in school because of, things, there's some issues that people are having with some of the online classes they're taking. And that's creating some issues for Notre Dame. And they couldn't get him into school. I don't see them going after Caleb Douglas that hard. I don't think that's an option. I don't think they like Steven Johnson a ton, like at least enough to offer him. So I'd be a little surprised if they get a 2020. And I don't there's really any guys that have the combination of, yes, I can get you into school, and yes, we think you can help us. And I don't think Caleb Douglas is a big, tall, long kid, really good ball skills, but he's kind of slow, in my opinion. He's not a real fast guy. I don't think he really brings – he's not going to help you in 2022. And to me, you're only bringing a guy in that you think can help you now, but then also can be an impact player down the road, and I don't think he's either one of those.
Justice Lowe's was the guy, but obviously when that did not come to fruition, that's kind of it for 2022.
That was it. Yeah. Brett Byers, who are the 5 guys in the 23 class – guess I'll include 24 too. Let's stick with 23.
Yeah.
That you are most confident will end up Irish. This is a good one.
I do. It is good. So guys that I feel good about right now, just 2023. And most of these have been kind of updated on the website if you want to go check out some of the latest articles. Monroe Freeling is a guy that I do feel good about. Oceanside Collegiate in South Carolina. I feel good about him, just kind of speaking with him. He's a guy that talked to me a lot because I asked, obviously, about the coaching change at offensive line, right? Because that's obviously going to be pertinent to kind of his understanding. And he just emphasized, with the coaching change, I really just wanted to kind of take a step back and understand what gives me the best options both on the football field and outside, academics based. And anytime a guy says that to me, that tells me that they are seriously interested in Notre Dame. I know that he is high up their board. They're going to have to fight because all the Carolina schools are on him, like Clemson, North Carolina, NC State. They're all in the running. But, I do feel good about where Monroe Freeling is. Jason Moore, the defensive lineman from DeMatha, I really feel good about this one, to be honest with you. I feel I'm more positive about where they are with him right now than I thought I was going to be going into it. He is obviously a very highly recruited kid, top 50 in a lot of spots. There is going to be obviously a lot of, and he's going to say the cliches that there's no leaders and all that good stuff, which I don't think that there's a perceived leader, at least, kind of publicly, but everything that he kind of was just stating to me, everything he said about Notre Dame, everything that he was just he was talking a lot about scheme fits, things that he really likes that they could offer him from the diversity of playing a strong side defensive end, moving inside. I feel pretty good about where they are with Jason Moore. Malik Muhammad, I feel good about where they are with Malik Muhammad. He's a guy that I have written down. I think that the cornerback out of South Oak Cliff, Texas, ranked as the number 15 overall, number 2 cornerback by On3 Sports, and a top 50 pretty much unanimous across every recruiting platform. He's a kid that told me, that he's going to kind of take his time with this one. So this one, I don't think is going to be one that's going to bust anytime in the near future. He's doing his due diligence.
I think it's good for Notre Dame. It's good for Notre Dame.
Yes. So you're not going to hear anything about him committing anytime soon because he wants to take all his visits. He told me he doesn't want to make an impulsive decision. He wants to do his due diligence, but I think they are in a good spot with him. One guy that I think I I'm up and down a little bit with it, but I think they're in a good spot with Samson Okulola from Thayer Academy in Massachusetts. Now he's a guy that straight up told me the Jeff Quinn thing took him off guard because he had developed a great relationship with Jeff Quinn. Spoke very highly of Coach Quinn. And he is a young man. I know Brian kind of put this on the board at one point when I kind of put it out there. He doesn't know a ton about Harry Hiestand. He doesn't know other than the guys that are in the NFL that we know of, like Quentin Nelson and McGlinchey and Zach Martin and all these dudes, right? Like that's kind of how the most that he knows about Coach Hiestand, and he hasn't really spoken to him much at this point. So I think that this one's going to be big though because he's in a good spot right now. And then when he sits down and has the ability to talk to Harry Hiestand, and I think Marcus Freeman was just through his school here recently to visit with him. I'm working on an update on that. As soon as he talks to Hiestand and it really just kind of sits down, I feel like they're going to be in an even better spot. So he's a guy for me that I think that they're in a really good spot for. And then the last guy I've written down, I think, Brian, do you know how to pronounce? Is it Picotti?
I think it's Pichotti.
Pichotti. Okay, I'm an idiot.
think,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so Phil Pichotti, linebacker out of Penn Ridge in Pennsylvania, 2023. I think that right now this is going to be a dogfight between him and Penn State as it stands. I don't think that this is like a no-brainer one, but I do think that having a head coach like Marcus Freeman with the background he has at linebackers, and he's very academically driven young man, and he kind of just fits. I think he fits the culture of Notre Dame well. So those would be a few of the 2023 guys that I've spoken to. Actually all of them that I just mentioned, and I feel good about where they stand. A couple other guys I feel, kind of a mix a little bit, but I think when you're looking at guys like Freeling, Moore, Muhammad, Pichotti, like I feel good about where those guys and Okunlola from Thayer Academy. I feel pretty good about those guys.
I would throw Christian Gray into that conversation still, even though he's not the lock that he was a month ago. I still feel Christian Gray is in there. The three guys to me that stand out, and they're looking, Jalen Moore's obviously in there. I'm not quite as on board with you on Pichotti simply because I haven't spoken to him. So, right, like you have. So that's why I'm not quite there yet. But I feel like at linebacker, I feel like between Bowles, Jaden Osbury, Pichotti, and Anthony Hill, between those four, they'll definitely get one of them, in my opinion. So I don't know which one I think between those four guys, they'll get one of them. I think at Christian Gray, I'm with you on Muhammad. I'm not sure if I'm ready to say I'm confident he's going to end up at Notre Dame now, but I think they're in that game. And I think when he narrows his list down, they'll be in it. If they can get him on campus one more time, then I'll I'll jump on board with you. I think another guy that I'll throw in there is if they choose to push for him, and right now I don't think they are, is Malik Elzy, the receiver from Chicago. Now, the thing is, they're not necessarily pushing hard for him because there's some other guys they like better, Carnell Tate and Jalen Brown and Rodney Gallagher, guys like that. But if they say, hey, Malik, we want you and they're going to push for it, I think he's the guy that I think would end up at Notre Dame. The problem as far as guys I'm most confident in is, number one, they're on some big-time players.
For sure.
And, you're not going to always have those guys early. The other problem is some of the big-time players they wanted, they're already in the class. Keon Keeley, Brennan Vernon, Drake Bowen, Justin Rhett, Peyton Bowen. I mean, those are 5 top 100 players that are already in the class.
Yeah.
And so they're a little ahead of the game than I think more normally they would be. So when I look at it, I'm with you on Jason Moore. And Notre Dame feels really good about where they are with Jason Moore. Like, they feel real confident, which is why, and this is what I love, what I have learned about this staff is when they feel that they're the leader for a kid, the previous staff would kind of, okay, well, we're good there. So they say, it's like they're like a sharks that smell blood in the water, right? Like, we got a chance with him. Bam, full court press, right? Like, let's not lose this momentum.
Yeah. And
they're definitely not doing that with Jason. If they can get him on campus in the next month or two, I feel they could wrap this up a lot sooner than expected. That's how confident I am in Jason Moore. And you give me a 3-man class, Brendan Vernon, Jason Moore, and Keon Keeley, a year after getting Tyson Ford and Aiden Gabira and Donovan Heinisch, that's really good D-line recruiting. And a guy that I'm not as confident about as I was a month ago is Samuel Mpemba And he's another guy that I think Notre Dame was his leader for a while, but I'm not as hot. I'm not as locked on that for couple of reasons. Number one is I think they like him a lot, but I think there's some other Rovers that they like just as much, if not more, like Nicholas Harbaugh, for example. Yeah. But I think right now their focus is on they're trying to get that second inside linebacker. And that's why I say between Troy Bowles, Jaden Ausberry, Anthony Hill, and Phil Picciotti, of those four, I do feel confident saying that they're going to get one of them.
That's a great list, too.
Yeah. You get one of those guys with Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
Like, because to me, Phil Picciotti is a very underrated recruit. Like, somebody has him in the top 200. He's not a top 200. To me, he's a top 100 linebacker. I mean, this kid to me is a top 100 to 150 player. I think he's a good football player. Anthony Hill, obviously, is a 5-star. Troy Bowles is a top 50 guy, I believe. Jaden Ausberry is a borderline 5-star guy. He's had some really interesting things to say to people about Notre Dame now that Al Washington is there. Because what y'all got to remember is with some of these linebackers that are big-time players like Troy Bowles, Al Washington was recruiting him to Ohio State as a linebacker because he was the linebackers coach. So now that's going to create that connection. And then Marcus Freeman steps into the conversation. And, then they're going to eventually have a defensive coordinator that's going to be the linebackers coach most likely. So they've got assets that they're throwing at some of these guys. The key for them is staying in the game long enough to get these guys on campus. Yeah. That's going to be the key.
Linebackers going to be really interesting. And just kind of like reiterate, Brian, which is like, I know you always talk about like, sometimes recruiting rankings don't really mean much. Like Picciotti because I wrote it down because I was like, this is really interesting what the variance is here. Like On 3 and Rivals both have him as a 4-star top 250 kid, but then 24/7 has him rated as a 3-star, and ESPN didn't even have him rated. I'm like, that's some of the most variance I've seen on a prospect or a recruit I've seen so far this cycle. It's very odd.
And I'd have him even higher than On 3 and Rivals have him. I mean, I think Rivals has him a 4-star, but not in the top 250, something like that. And then I think On 3 has him in the top 50, top 250. One of those two. I could be wrong on that. But
On 3 has him number 236, and Rivals has him number 209 in the
209. So they do have him in the top 250 now. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I think he's better than that personally.
Yep.
But once the camps come around and all that kind of stuff, we'll see these guys go up. And then once their offer lists improve, because these clowns focus on offer lists too. So whatever.
Sure. Is
what it is. Jay Montalbano, do we wait on Dante or get Arnold in the class now? I personally would wait.
I would wait as well. I was going to say that because I think that the difference in the tiers, right, of a Dante down to an Arnold is a lot larger than Arnold to a Vizina or somebody else that we
Avery
might
Johnson.
Avery Johnson for Kansas, right? Like I think that just because that gap is so big, in my opinion, between Dante and Arnold, I would wait it out because I just don't think that the difference between the second and third and fourth guy is as large as between 1 and 2.
Now the key is you've got to get one of those guys if you miss on Dante, and that's going to be the issue. Is there is a timeline where you miss on Arnold, you miss on Vizina, you miss on Johnson, then it's like, well, you're Dante Moore or bust.
Right.
I mean, but then don't miss on Dante Moore. I mean, that's the reality, right? Don't miss on Dante. But I do think there's a time. I just don't know if Jackson Arnold's time frame, and he may not be doing this. This is just my opinion. This game of chicken that I think he's doing, he may not be doing this. He may genuinely love Oklahoma. I'm just giving you kind of like a week ago, this kid was all about Notre Dame and he wants Notre Dame and all this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden it's Oklahoma. It's like, this kid's a smart kid, But no, to me, I would see. Here's the deal, guys. Getting big time quarterbacks is not easy.
No.
So if you're not willing to see it to the end, then don't get upset when you don't get big time quarterbacks. At some point in time, you have to say, look, Buchner's a redshirt freshman. Drew Pine was a redshirt freshman this year. Angeli is a serviceable guy. And we're in a really good shape with some 2024 kids. Because that's the other thing is they're in some really good shape. Now, Julian Sayin is not as good as Dante Moore, in my opinion.
No.
At least not yet. CJ Carr, not as good as Dante Moore. Like some of those guys are not to me. And then Brent Byers have recently fallen in love with 2024 Julian Sayin. Dude seems like a future stud. Anything you tell us about him and his recruitment? Ryan will get to that in a second because Ryan talked to him and did a story on him. But to me, he's not Dante. But guys like him are good enough to where if you really feel like you can get one of them like soon, then that's even more reason for me to say, because Tyler's young, because Drew's still young, because you can go get a grad transfer if you run it, if somebody gets hurt, you have Angeli. It's more reason for me to say, wait it out for Dante, in my opinion. So yes, I would be willing to wait it out. If it's like take Arnold now or wait on Dante, that's why I'm waiting on Dante. See it out, see it through. And here's the other thing: just because a kid commits to another school, like if Jackson Arnold committed Notre Dame, do you think the schools that want him would stop recruiting him?
Right.
No. So keep recruiting him. That's the other thing. Flip somebody. You're freaking Notre Dame. Flip somebody if you need to, but try to get Dante, because it's harder to flip a Dante Moore than it is a Jackson Arnold or Chris Vazina, if we're being honest. So Vince, so Brent and Julian Sayin, Vince, Ryan, you want to address that one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Julian Sayin, for people that don't know, is out of Carlsbad in California, 2024 quarterback. He is highly rated right now by 24/7 Sports. Obviously, it's a little early. Things will change. But he's number 14 overall player, number 2 quarterback in the class. I spoke to him. He is a kid, although he's only going into his junior year, just coming off of his sophomore season, right? Junior year, he wants to make the decision before his junior year. So he has an early decision that is going to come sometime before his junior season. Now, the 3 schools that are in contention right now that he likes the most are Notre Dame, Georgia, and Texas. I don't have a great feeling on how likely Notre Dame is. All I can tell you is he's one of the 3 finalists, or of the perceived finalists now, of the 3 favorites now. So it's a 3-way battle. Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame. I think it can go either way. They are in the race, obviously. They're in the conversation, but we will have some clarity on this before his junior year. So you guys won't have to wait a crazy amount of time, but I think it's a legitimate 3-horse race, and I think it's legitimately that he is still weighing his options. He doesn't have a clear favorite right now. I think that the top group is what the top group is right now, but we'll have some clarity on it in the next few months.
All right, what's the next one? We got Gavin Alexander. Why is Avery Johnson so low in the rankings? He looks really good. Avery's talented, but he's very raw as a passer. I'm okay with where his ranking is, because he's got a lower floor than the other quarterbacks. Now, I love his ceiling. Now, I have 2 questions about him. Number 1, really raw. Number 2, I don't know how strong his arm is right now. That would be he's got a good arm, but I want to see it, because he's so unorthodox. You don't see him just sitting in the pocket and just driving off that back leg and really driving his core through the throw and just bam, throwing a 25-yard in cut on a line. You just don't see him doing that a lot. He's kind of playing street ball a lot of times, but he's really athletic. And the thing I like about him too is, if I knew that, let's just say Avery Johnson was like, Coach, I want to come to Notre Dame, man, and I don't care if you recruit another quarterback, I want to be at Notre Dame. If I knew that about Avery, I'd take him now, because then I'd still recruit Dante and the other quarterbacks, because, I think there's either this year or next year, they're going to have to sign 2 quarterbacks, in my opinion, because I don't think Drew Pine's going to stay for 5 years if he's not the quarterback. He's going to stay and graduate, but he's not going to stay and be a 5th-year senior as a backup quarterback. I don't think he's going to want to go play somewhere. And it's not a guarantee that Tyler Buchner is going to be a 4 or 5-year guy either. If he's as good as we think he is, he's going to be no more than a 4-year guy. At some point in time, you're going to need a second quarterback, either 24 or 23. If Avery Johnson was willing to be a second quarterback in this class, I'd flat out take him now, because the unique thing about Avery is he's a really athletic player. Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if he ends up not being a quarterback if you go play him a receiver. I think he's athletic enough to do that. He could be a Matt Jones type of guy. So I would want him at quarterback and develop as a quarterback. But if for some reason he gets passed over by a couple guys, that's when I think you can move him. But I like him as a quarterback. I think the thing I like about Avery too is he's raw, needs a lot of work, but you have time, because Tyler is young, because Drew is young. You don't need Avery Johnson. The only reason the only reason you're talking about Dante Moore coming in and playing early is because he's just that good. Right. But Avery would be able to have the time to develop. So he'd be a nice fallback option or a number 2 quarterback option in this class. And then if you don't get another quarterback, you still got a top 150 guy. But I'm okay with him being in that 150 to 200 range, Ryan, because I do think the floor compared to Arnold and Vizina and some of those other top 100 quarterbacks, the floor is a lot lower. And I think you have to take that into account into his rankings, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's a boomer bust type of kid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you said, the ceiling's high because he is a dynamic athlete. Like, I don't want to undersell just how athletic he is. Like, he can legitimately do things in the quarterback run game that are potentially special. Like, he has that, and like you said, he does have conversion potential as well. Like, he is 100% a productive next level athlete. Just the question is, maybe it's a position switch at some point. I don't think that he's definitely not. Definitely doesn't have the arm of the Vizinas of the world and the Dante Moores even of the world. Like, it's just not in that caliber. And I mean, honestly, his school doesn't really ask too much of him in the pass game. He's just the best athlete on the field. So I'm there with you. I think the ranking's right where it should be, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think the ceiling could be higher, but right now he is where he is for a reason.
Yep.
Luke Walker, how much would Harbaugh leaving help in Notre Dame's pursuit of Dante Moore? Just to me, it depends on who they hire.
Right.
I mean, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, in a vacuum, yes, losing your head coach is going to help you. But like Brian was just going to kind of illustrate, it depends on what's the next step. What's the relationship building? I mean, because like I even went through with Okolola, the offensive tackle out of Massachusetts. It's like in theory, it's like, oh, you lose your offensive line coach. Like, that's a big jab in the side of recruiting, right? And you have to rebuild a relationship. But luckily, the next guy that came in is a guy like Harry Heastam, where we think they're going to be able to rebuild that relationship, going to be able to sell an even better vision potentially, right? So I don't know how likely it is that somebody's better than Harbaugh, but maybe it clicks better, and maybe that will help. Maybe that would be a good relationship. So you don't know; it's the unknown. You have no way of knowing it. But in a vacuum, losing a head coach certainly doesn't help recruiting. But the question is, who's the next guy afterwards?
Right. Yeah, like if they just promoted Josh Gaddis, I don't. It doesn't hurt them. I don't think a ton. If they were to go outside the program and bring in a whole new staff, yeah, that's going to hurt Michigan a lot, because then the new coaches most likely are going to have to build a new relationship with him. But, look, and somebody asked me in the chat, like, how long would I wait for Dante Moore? I mean, signing when he signs, like I'm literally recruiting Dante Moore until he signs with somebody else, or he just tells me stop calling. I mean, I think he can be that good of a player. And honestly, if he committed to Notre Dame and Alabama wanted him, or Georgia wanted him, or Clemson wanted him, do you think they'd stop recruiting him because he committed to Notre Dame? No, they wouldn't. You think Ryan Day is going to stop recruiting Dante Moore if he committed to Notre Dame? No, he's not. Notre Dame needs to start being that way. And I think this staff is going to be that way. I don't think they're going to be like, well, we lost him. He committed somewhere else. Oh well. But yes, Sam Tyrell asked it. That's who it was. How long would I wait for Dante Moore? Look, if he's what I think he is, then I'm till he signs with someone else. I mean, that doesn't mean I wouldn't then go get another quarterback. Also, I'd take an Avery Davis and still keep recruiting Dante to say, hey, look, man, we had to get somebody, but you're still our guy. And I'd say, look, hey, if you're as good as we think you are, Avery can end up being a pass catcher for you. Look how athletic he is. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing I would say. Because like Dante Moore's not going to be afraid of Avery Johnson. If they got Jackson Arnold and we're still willing to recruit Dante Moore, I don't think Dante Moore would be afraid of Jackson Arnold. But you also have to be smart about it. And I'm going to go to school that doesn't have another quarterback that I also like a lot. But for sure, I'm recruiting. Should we be worried about Keeley at Alabama? Look, I mean, you always be worried about Alabama coming after a kid. But listen, Keon Keeley's going to get recruited by every team in the country. And as long as he says he's committed, then he's committed. I mean, look, when it's like Notre Dame fans want to recruit the best players, but they don't want the side effects that come with recruiting the best players, which is other teams are going to keep recruiting them. And a lot of times these kids are going to take visits, especially kids that aren't from the local region. And, look, why wouldn't you visit Alabama if you're Keon Keeley? I mean, did you watch Will Anderson this year? You know what I mean? Like,
pretty good.
You don't think that's the position that they're pushing him towards? Of course they are. I still feel that he's a Notre Dame kid. And he's otherwise, I really don't know what to tell you. I mean, just every school's going to like him. Brent Byers, I feel like Freeman and company have offered more high-level recruits in the last few weeks than BTK did his entire Irish tenure, right? I would say post-2015, yes. No, post-2014, yes. I think a lot of people forget is Notre Dame signed some big-time players his first few years. I mean, they signed 3 5-star defensive ends in 2011 class.
That was Aaron Lynch year, right?
Stephon Tuitt and Ishaq Williams. Yeah. I mean, that 2013 class had like 5 5-stars. Jalen, Max Redfield, Greg Bryant was a 5-star on Rivals. Eddie Vanderdoes. I mean, they went after more big-time players early in Kelly's tenure. And I made this point before. Notre Dame had higher ranked classes and had more round 1, 2, and 3 players on its 2015 team than Clemson did. Notre Dame had a higher ranked class than Clemson in 4 of the 5 years leading up to that 2015 team. So the classes that made that, and the only class that Clemson had higher was the freshman class, I believe. And then if you look at the number of players from those teams, and I'm not talking about like a freshman, I've said this before, not a freshman who didn't play, but guys that played on those teams in the 2015 teams. Notre Dame had more guys taken in the first, second, and third round than Clemson had taken in the first, second, and third round. Notre Dame used to bring an elite level talent, but then he lost some good recruiters, replaced them with not good recruiters, and he got freaking lazier than he already was. You lose Tony Alford and replace him with Autry Denson, you're going to not be as good recruiting running backs. It's just a fact. And that kind of hurt Notre Dame. And so then Kelly started doing the whole shopping down a different aisle thing because some of the players he brought in that were big-time players, you got to babysit more. And he wasn't willing to do that. And he also wasn't willing to be as involved as you need to be to babysit those kind of guys. He wanted to go do his thing. And, so that's why you start recruiting kids that kind of govern themselves, more mature kids. And that's fine. But occasionally you have to be willing to say, this kid could really help us. And yeah, we got to hold his hand. So you know what you do? Hey, GA, your job is to make sure that kid is in class every single day. And if he's not in class every single day, you're going to be held responsible. That's what you got to do sometimes. I guarantee you Lou Holtz had to do that in 1988. I've been told that by players from that time, that there were some guys on that team that you had to have somebody on your coaching staff, somebody in your football office every day had to make sure he knocked on that kid's door and made sure that kid got to class. It's just facts. Not that they're dumb kids because they got to Notre Dame. They graduated from Notre Dame, but it's like you got to just make sure that they understand the importance of it. And I'm not saying I want 30 guys on the team like that, but sometimes you need to be willing to bring a kid like that in if he's at least able to do the work. And, that's a key for me. So, but I agree with you. I think, Brent, I do think this is the way more aggressive coaching staff now than they have been the last 5 years. Guinea pig clips. If we consistently recruit top 5 classes, even if they're not number 1, is that championship caliber? I mean, that's better recruiting than Clemson.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it again. Clemson had one class that ranked in the top 3 in the last 10 years. Last 7, 8 years. One. And that was that class was just a part of the worst Clemson team in almost a decade.
Yep.
Right? That highly ranked class. Because that's the Miles Murphy, Brian Breezy class that just went, 10-3? Right? So, yeah. Yes, definitely. If you're recruiting top 5 every year, again, assuming they're legitimate top 5 classes, not points-based top 5 classes where you could sign 8 defensive backs and no offensive linemen and it's considered a great class because the point system. Legitimate top 5 classes, yeah, that's national championship caliber, 100%. Josh Miller, Ryan, do you know about Brady Ford from Whitmer, Toledo? He's a quarterback in 2025. I just asked because I knew his dad, and they are diehard Notre Dame fans.
I do not know Brady. No, I do not know of him. I will look him up, though, Josh.
That's right.
I don't know him.
Write that sucker down. All right. What do we got next? Sean Higgins, alt at all concerned about parents of committed players referencing Notre Dame being way behind on NIL. How do they solve this without comprising their standards? I mean, no. I mean, because Notre Dame's going to explain to them, like, look, we can't do that. That's not how it works here. Look how much money Kyle Hamilton made. Look how much money Isaiah Foskey's making. We're following the rules. And at the end of the day, listen, folks, if a parent has their hand out, they're going to not come to Notre Dame whether the NIL exists or not. This has been going on for decades. Those parents that feel that their kids should get compensated are going to be taking payouts from other schools anyway. And look, they're committed to Notre Dame for a reason. You can also say, hey, look, I think this should be better. A lot of these parents don't really know how it works because they're being offered money from schools, and then Notre Dame explains to them this is how it works, and that's not legal, or this is, or whatever the case may be. So I don't think Notre Dame is that far behind, and actually they're just, Notre Dame's doing it legally and other schools are not. What Texas A&M is doing is not supposed to be allowed by the rules they set forth, but the NCAA just doesn't care. Notre Dame is going to self-govern itself as they always have. Like it or not, I mean, this is how they've always been. And it's just like when people said, oh, they can't compete because they don't buy players like Bama does or whoever else. Okay. And that was true in the 80s. That was true in the 70s. That was true in the 60s. This isn't new. These parents aren't different. It's just now it's in the form of NIL as opposed to bags of cash, or like Jeremy Pruitt handing McDonald's bags full of cash. It's the way it's always going to be. Where do you see Notre Dame being able to increase their presence with NIL amongst players and recruits or portal transfers? Thanks. I mean, look, guys, the NIL, it's the Wild West, right? And kids who that is their focus are not going to come to Notre Dame. They're just not. But those same kids will never come to Notre Dame because there's always been money in for athletes. There's always been money for athletes. It's just sometimes it was legal and sometimes it's not. Right? Notre Dame's pitch is going to be what it is. Look, there's value in the Notre Dame degree that those programs can offer you. You can take your $20,000 you're going to make here and turn it into $5 million there, where your $500,000 you're making there is it. That's it. That's what it is. Right? And you can point out, look, this is what Kyle Hamilton got. This is what so-and-so got. If you come to Notre Dame and you become the player we think you can be, you're going to make money. Simple as that. And that's how Notre Dame is going to do it. And if kids don't want to hear that and kids want the guaranteed money, then they're not going to come to Notre Dame. That's just the reality of it. But that was always true. And I know that I have a different opinion and people obsess over NIL, but the reality is Notre Dame's not going to do what other people do. They're just not. They never have done that. They're going to be competitive when it comes to dollars at the end of the day. Their dollars are just going to be earned the way that it's intended to be earned, which is actual being on the market, and your name, image, and likeness has value because of what you've done, not just as an enticement to get you to go to school there. That's not how NIL was supposed to be. That's technically not legal. It's just the NCAA is not going to do anything about it because they're a bunch of freaking cowards. But whatever the case may be, Notre Dame's not going to – Look, cheating is so rampant in the SEC. I've had friends play in the SEC. I've heard so much about the $500 handshakes. Or if you have a good game, there's literally a line of boosters for the locker room, and it just looks like fans, and they shake your hand, shake your hand, shake your hand, shake your hand. By the time you get to the locker room, you got a couple grand in your pocket. That's a fact. That happens. The NCAA could prove that in 5 seconds if they wanted to. Have a compliance there sitting there watching it happen. Hey, man, you just came off the field. Why do you have $1,000 in your hand? I don't understand. But they don't care. They've never cared. And the only teams that get in trouble are teams that are not big name programs that try to be good, SMU, and do it stupidly, or you self-report. Don't self-report, and the NCAA's not going to do anything to you when it comes to cheating. It's as simple as that. We got any more questions there in the recruiting section, Vince? Any more wide receivers in the portal that we were looking at? Possibly RJ Sneed. RJ Sneed's going to Colorado.
Yeah.
And I don't, as of right now, I don't know of any guys.
I don't think there's anybody that attractive to be. I mean, I should rephrase that. I don't think there's anybody that's going to vastly upgrade what you already have right now. I know you talked about Chase Cota the other day. He's like a solid, decent football player, but I don't think that there's anybody right now that significantly upgrades what you're bringing back.
I don't think Chase Cota necessarily starts for you next year. I don't think it's guaranteed even starts for you. Right. So I'd rather coach up the young guys and move Xavier Watts. That's just kind of where I'm at. Raheem Pelham, if the offense gets off to a hot start at the beginning of the season, do you expect to see a run on offensive commits? I think so. I think kids are looking – there's a lot of offensive players, Ryan, you've experienced – they're looking for a reason to go to Notre Dame. Notre Dame has got to give them one, and that's going to be the key.
Well, I forget what recruit I was talking to that basically said, like, we're excited about Marcus Freeman, but I also just want to see it, right? And I think that's a lot of recruits just in general. I don't even think that's just offensive. I think that's on both sides of the ball that wants to see a tangible thing. They want to see what it's going to look like. So I can't remember what recruit told me that, but he was just like, same thing. Like, I love Marcus Freeman. Seems like a great guy. Had good contact with him, but like I want to see what it looks like on the field. So I think you're going to definitely get that layer for sure.
Yeah. We got the last three questions we're going to get to here, and then Ryan's got to run. He's got a baby he's got to go get taken care of, and we're over 3 hours in, and my voice is kind of shot. So Corey D with the super chat. Thank you, Corey. Notre Dame is in a much better place now than 2000 to 2010. It's a more attractive job. If Saban was younger, do you think he would come to Notre Dame? I do. Notre Dame is the one job everyone thinks about. I don't. I think Nick Saban, if he was younger, would just have 10 to 15 more years left at Alabama. He has a great situation. He's at a school with a great tradition. He's at a school that will do anything he wants. He's at a school where he gets anyone he wants in the school. It's easy for him to recruit. I don't know what look. I get it because like he's a Catholic and he thinks Nick Saban thinks very highly of Notre Dame, but thinking very highly of Notre Dame as an institution is a whole different animal than saying I'm going to go coach there and deal with having to admissions and making kids go to class. Nick Saban wants to. The reason Nick Saban loves Alabama is because it's an NFL team at a college and how they go about their business. Look, I've known people that have taught at Alabama. Trust me, it's an NFL team at a college campus. We can get into it another time. Why would he leave that? He's not going to leave that. He's paid a ton of money. There's no reason to come to Notre Dame. Would he be like, if Alabama didn't come along, would he have maybe left the Dolphins to come to Notre Dame or LSU to come to Notre Dame? Maybe, but it's Alabama, right? Like, just like if Marcus Freeman's having a ton of success over the next 10 years in Notre Dame, wins 3 or 4 titles, he's not going to run to Ohio State, right? Like, yeah, it's my dream school, my alma mater, but I got a really good thing going here, and you just don't leave those schools for those. That's why the only coach that's ever left a team that, was as good as Notre Dame as in Cincinnati is Brian Kelly, because most coaches aren't as self-absorbed and self-obsessed as Brian Kelly. So that's why you just don't see that kind of turnover. Nick Saban's not coming to Notre Dame. If Nick Saban was 10 years younger, he wouldn't come to Notre Dame. I think it's pretty cool to think about, and I think his Catholic background. But look, he's got a great situation there. And if he was 60, it would just mean, crap, we got to deal with him for a lot longer than we do now that he's in his 70s. That's all that means. Alan Watson, thank you for the super chat, Alan. Vince, have you ever noticed his avatar, the Bears? Okay, Vince is a Bears fan. Vince likes that. Do you think that with Freeman out the helm, that we will see more alumni on the sidelines? That is one thing I always respected about the U. I don't know if we'll see a lot more on the sidelines during games, because Notre Dame, it's not a real big sideline, and it's not a great seat, to be honest with you. I think we'll see them before game shaking hands, but I think they're going to go up to the, I wouldn't want to stand there for 3 hours. They're going to be down there before the game, shaking hands, seeing recruits and all that. So I think we'll see more of that. And then when the game starts, they'll be up where the rich people are, right? But definitely I do think Notre Dame, though. Yeah, exactly. And I think Notre Dame needs to make it a more player-friendly environment. Like I've heard, like Jim Lynch is a Hall of Famer. I heard that he, a few years ago, they make him buy tickets. I'm sorry. Jim Lynch doesn't have to buy season tickets for me. We're $1 billion, endowment. You can sell a couple gold flakes off the top of your dome to make sure that you can afford to buy, comp Jim Lynch and his fan. Guy won a national title for you. He was a great Hall of Fame type of player. You know what I mean? Like, if Rocket Ismail wants season tickets, Rocket Ismail doesn't have to pay for season tickets if I'm running Notre Dame, right? Let's be honest about that. So now maybe to get one of the $1,000 booths, whatever, but have an alumni booth, right, where you as an institution buy it out, and that's where some alums can go or whatever. But I definitely think we'll see a ton more involvement. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I know a lot of alums, and they are fired up about Marcus Freeman. And part of it is Marcus. Part of it is they hated Brian Kelly. And it's just like, what's the best thing about Marcus Freeman? He ain't Brian Kelly. And then they can list things they like about Marcus Freeman. But that, Vince, some alums too. That's just a fact. He was not a well-liked person because he didn't show them the respect for the blood, sweat, and tears that they laid down to make Notre Dame what it is that he even was able to be there. And that's something that I think bothered a lot of people. Last one, Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Brady Quinn let me down as a kid so many times I cried. I told my dad to have Brady Quinn lower my casket to let me down one last time. What are you talking about, man? Alex, you're killing me sometimes, man. I love you. But Brady Quinn turned a team that was garbage into a back-to-back New Year's Six bowl team. I mean, and like the games they lost, they didn't lose because of him. I mean, against USC, he let them down on a game, should have been a game-winning touchdown. And then the defense gave that play. I wasn't on Brady Quinn. Like Michigan State got the overtime. Brady led him to touchdown. The defense gave up a touchdown. I mean, got blown out by Michigan. I wasn't on Brady. So, man, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Brady was the man. He was great. He was a great quarterback. He was a winner. I mean, UCLA game, right? I mean, I still have visions of him just torching Penn State. I'm still remember watching Paul Puslesny trying to cover John Carlson and Brady just dropping dimes up the seam on him. You know what I mean? Like,
he's probably one of my top 2 or 3 favorite players just in general, I think. I mean, I love Jeff Samardzija. That whole team. I mean, honestly, Raymond McKnight, Darius Walker.
Mo Stovall was my guy. Loved Mo Stovall.
Yeah. Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted him. Yeah, I remember.
Yep. Loved Mo Stovall. He wasn't all that fast.
Fasano, Carlson, tight ends. Yeah, it was good times.
Yep. Brady Quinn was a legend. There's no doubt about it. So that's just a great way to end right there. Great way to end. Yeah, Brady is handsome. And this was my quarterback growing up because I'm a lot older than Ryan. This was my guy, because he, that was my first year being a Notre Dame fan. Was Tony Rice. So that was pretty cool. So that was my guy. So anyway, that's going to do it for our show today. Hey, and Vince, I'm going to take that away. Got this new graphic here, which we couldn't do today on the mail, Cindy, a lot on the mailbag because, we were bringing up so many questions, but hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share our podcast. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And if you don't think this is a 5-star show, either give us one anyway, or keep that to yourself. But if you like our show, I'm kidding. Give us a 5-star review. I mean that. Check out the message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Follow us, obviously, at irishbreakdown.com and check out everything we got going on. Tons of great stuff. Got a lot of stories up. I got a couple stories from Ryan. I got to go edit and publish and get those up now and all those type of things. And I have an article on the front page today talking about the big end position and sort of replacing Myra Tungaloa-Mosa and who I think that could be, and talk more about Riley Mills and Alexander Ahrensberger and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, check all that stuff out. So Vince, thank you for your producing skills today, my friend. I appreciate that very, very much. Ryan, thank you for being with us today. Didn't get to a ton of recruiting, but we got to talk some good football. It's a fun show, 3.5 hours long, been a lot longer than I thought, but it was a lot of fun. So anyway, everybody, thanks for being with us. We may have a show this weekend, but I doubt it. I think we're going to be back to action on Monday. Ryan and I will be there to talk recruiting. Who knows what may happen this weekend, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon, and thank you for listening to the Irish Breakdown Podcast.